Hello and welcome to 6 Part. Today I'm gonna continue the story. What if Deku had green Amaterasu Quirk Part 2? If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Finally, it's over. The devil's fire has been put out. The Japanese themselves witnessed it. They can now at last earn a living again. At last, the ominous clouds that had been hovering above them had lifted. Teams of restoration heroes and construction workers were working non-stop. Unknown Place All for one laughed to himself, poor fools, living in the delusion that heroes can save them. I pity them. HMM. You spared the boy. Let the world believe he died by your hands. A decision based on sympathy will come back to bite you sooner or later, take it from me, Hawks. Another man with black hair said, so they really got him, huh? Oh well. He turned to leave. His ally paused and glanced over his shoulder as All for One asked, that's all you have to say? I thought you'd be more upset at this development. I sure as hell ain't thrilled, but as long as the kid's breathing, they won't truly know peace. Even dead or alive, he'll haunt All Might and Teleki. All for One sighed. Fair enough, though I must applaud what you did to their reinforcements. Let me guess, just to twist the knife and endeavor some more. The man gave a cunning smile. He was alluding to the battered and burned Bakugo and Yagi when he said, that's partly it, but also because I just wanted to give the kids some presents. Island war footage matched the footage of the Green Devil's last stand against the heroes. The devastation, the steadfast fighters, the defeat. First seen by a brilliant inventor and his extraordinary offspring on a man-made island in the United States, the video would eventually spread to the rest of the world. You fulfilled your promise, Toshinori. I'm so sorry about Katsuki and your daughter, but it's over. David Shield wiped the tears from behind his glasses and thought, thank you. His daughter, who sat next to him and held his hand, continued to stare at the TV. Papa. How soon can I fly out to Japan, the Central Hospital? Amazing injuries were inflicted on the heroes who battled the devil. The public applauded their actions, supported their courage, and showed Death Arm a lot of sympathy. The tiny creature took the unfortunate man's arm. Tsukachi and All Might indicated they knew someone who could provide him with the best prostheses, but he was thinking about retiring. They waited for Death Arm to decide whether to accept their offer. Toshinori, meanwhile, moved through the hospital like a ghost. His time as a hero had been cut to 2 hours, and his body was weaker than before because the demon had targeted his stomach wound. The living legend's retirement was drawing near, but it wasn't the only burden on his mind. He went by the hospital room of Ingenium, where the turbo hero was tightly cast on his leg and his younger brother was quite upset about his severe injuries. As he continued on, Toshi reflected, that might have been another family split. He witnessed the prognosis being given to Izumi. A.N. Potential incoming medical errors. Your arms suffered due to the extreme blowback of a new shockwave aspect of your quirk. Previously, your arms ruptured due to this recoil, resulting in broken bones and shredded muscles, but thanks to the support gear you had, you avoided a full break and anything more than third-degree burns. But, there's something more concerning at play here. The doctor took a closer look at his clipboard. When muscles and bones are damaged, they repair themselves and become stronger. Your body is doing that, but at a slower rate than it should. Even with medical assistance, your body isn't healing as much as it should, or as quickly. Our scans show that your structure is showing signs of frailty well beyond your years. Izumi looked at the physician with concern. She questioned, what does that mean? The physician let out a sigh. It means you're becoming weaker, your body is losing its ability to heal, and your frame is comparable to someone in their late 40s. Listen Yagi, what you did out there was noble, but if your body continues to degrade like this, I can't become a hero? She asked in a state of fear. I don't know if you'll even live to see your 21st birthday. I've already given your father the news, you should discuss it with him. Toshinori was shocked by his good fortune. Izumi was dying slowly. They have to cope with one catastrophe before another arises. Is One for All to blame for this? Does she find it too much? But I can't let my kid die. She has so much of my trust. We'll battle this together, Izumi. I swear. For your sake, I'll wait as long as necessary. Then the blonde man went by Inko's room. The surgery had taken a toll on her, but she was stable and sleeping. The doctor remarked, Sir, we have her results. Luckily, it's not bad enough to make her retire. Thanks to Hawks, the wound wasn't deep, and just shy of a life-threatening strike. But there is something. I hope you weren't planning on having another child. Toshinori sensed the destruction of his universe. Due to her injury, Inko was unable to conceive again. He would never see the birth of their own child. Following the death of Izuku, he had hoped to have a son or daughter with Inko, something he had desired for years. That dream is now dead. One tear was streaming down the man's cheek as he stood still in the corridor. Before leaving, he thought angrily, "Burn in hell, Green Devil." All Might. He was halted by a voice. It was Naomasa Tsukachi, an old acquaintance of his. To be honest, he looked quite rough. The man had been extremely busy since the Green Devil appeared, with the police having to track him down and cope with the increase in criminal activity. He didn't appear much better, even after the evil vigilante's death. Over the past few days, something has been gnawing at him. We need to talk. None of the Might argued. To converse, they went to a secret place. What's up? You should be more relaxed now that the hell is over, the Mighty said. Then Tsukachi said what he intended to say. Right back at you. What do you know about Izuku? A question like that surprised All Might. What is he aware of regarding his own son? What sort of inquiry is that? Tsukachi, where's this coming from, and why now when he's... The detective demanded. Please, just answer me. Things like what you saw from his daily life, his mood around the house, the most recent things. Toshinori could see that his pal was serious and would not accept rejection. His eyes seemed to be waiting for a specific response. When the blonde opened his mouth, Tsukachi listened intently. He was a quiet and timid boy. Most days he was holed up in his room. I never got any complaints from his school. He had good grades, but not a lot of friends. Any reason why? Inquired Tsukachi. Toshinori became agitated. That's a difficult book to read. He always liked watching and recording peculiarities. He'd have been a wonderful analyst if he hadn't been so bent on being a hero. I wish he'd recognized a different path, like Melissa. Toshi nodded when Tsukachi remarked, that must have been hard. Tsukachi turned to face All Might, his eyes twitching. I did my best, but it still turned out like this. Toshinori said, I meant hard for Izuku, which startled him. The boy was quirkless and told he couldn't be a hero in a household where hero work is practically the family business. You, Shimura, Inko, now Izumi. Surely you can imagine how suffocating that must have been. Tsukachi's implication did not sit well with Toshinori. He asked, obviously trying to get out of this topic, anything else you'd like to ask me? Tsukachi let out a sigh but kept walking. He inquired about the relationship between Izumi and Izuku. They may occasionally get at each other's throats, according to All Might, but that's normal for siblings. He pretended that it was absurdly impossible for Izumi to ever bully him due to their disparate power. Tsukachi inquired about the frequency of Izuku's injuries. When Toshinori saw him, he appeared to be in good health. Tsukachi concluded by inquiring as to whether Izuku ever displayed any indications of feeling unimportant or even undesired. What exactly are you trying to get at here, Tsukachi? If there's something you want to ask me, stop beating around the bush. Though he concealed it from the hero's view, Tsukachi tightened his quivering fist. Tsukachi left his friend perplexed and doubtful after saying, there's something you need to see, you and Inko. Let me know as soon as you're both in shape for it. After boarding the elevator, the detective descended to a floor below the surface. Above the line of floor buttons, a dark screen showed before the elevator doors opened. Identifying, stated the mechanized voice. Detective Tsukachi. Permission granted. Tsukachi entered a small, white metal hallway as the doors opened. Hawks was the only one in the first of two rooms, which appeared to be a meeting room of some kind. Leaning back in his chair and holding a cup of iced coffee, he had his feet up on the desk. The wing hero said, so? And Tsukachi let out a disappointed sigh. Hawk's eyes remained fixed on his cup as he took a sip. He doesn't have a clue what his family has done. He barely even knows his own son. He gave me bare-bone information. He doesn't know his daughter or Bakugo either, how cruel they were to him. He grumbled and got up from his desk. Neglect, abuse, isolation, Hawks said. Hawks took out a burnt forest green notebook and said, that just about confirms the worst chapters of his journal. When they eventually searched Izuku's backpack, they discovered handwritten records of his experiences since discovering his quirk. He had good times with excellent people, but most of it was fairly painful. The reason Izuku still has a heart at all is because of those folks. His first companion and study partner was Mina Ishido. The first person to ever assist him in confronting his demons was Momo Yaoyorozu. He did for Kyoka and Kirishima what he wished someone had done for him. Mrs. Todoroki. Hawks leafed through Izuku's journal. Well, at least we know why he hates Endeavor so much. At the less enjoyable times, he positioned feather bookmarks. After assisting Ashido in passing away, I returned home and saw that his mother views him as a reminder of her deceased spouse. After Asui and Fuyumi's therapy session, he went home and discovered his dad's heroic persona. He felt as though his heart had been torn out twice. After a guilt-ridden nightmare, he returned home and discovered one for all, his beloved old man's true feelings toward him, and how his family had replaced him with another oddball child. Izuku Yagi and others must have indeed died on this day. Izuku was different from his relatives. It would have been preferable if he had simply forgotten them and moved on, but he didn't. He continued to observe and discovered the truth. His family's wounds can no longer be healed by any force in the world. Just when they believed Endeavor was having a difficult time, particularly in light of the Toya scenario. I will never have children, Hawks reflected. Tsukachi approached a wall that had steel shutters. Neither sound nor light could get through. He inquired, "How is he doing?" Hawks rolled up the shutters by pressing a button on the wall. It never got any easier, no matter how many times they witnessed this. The sight of doctors operating on Izuku's arms was not pleasant. He was in good hands because they were among the best available in Japan. Izuku had bone shards protruding from multiple locations when he was captured. All Might has left more scars. With every ragged breath, he rose and fell gently. To ensure he wouldn't emerge from his slumber too soon, the breathing machine also administered anesthetic. Once more. Stable. He'll wake up in a few months. He's wearing a quirk suppressant cuff on his ankle, so we don't have to worry about him burning the hospital to the ground. Hawks replied. The bulletproof glass was touched by Tsukachi's hand. He was wearing a guilty expression. Hawks groaned. I told All Might he and Inko had to see this. I don't blame you. We can't keep letting them turn away from him. They need to see what they've done, even if we have to force them to see. Otherwise, what was the point of bringing him back alive? Tsukachi grinned. A few days later back at Central Hospital, Inko and Toshinori were standing in front of Tsukachi. They all got into the elevator and headed to the lowest floor, saying, "Okay, let's go." As they passed down the small hallway, Inko inquired, "So what's been stressing you out so much, and why did you ask all those questions about Izuku?" Tsukachi swallowed. He had been mentally prepared for this for days, but he still struggled to speak. Inko and Toshi nodded as he started. "You think that the Green Devil killed your son at some time?" The two parents were shocked to hear he didn't. Toshinori exclaimed, "What are you talking about?" With tears in her eyes, Inko exclaimed, "Izuku is alive." It didn't help that Tsukachi couldn't turn to face them. Anyone could have done that, even if it wasn't the Green Devil. An eccentric middle schooler is a simple target. At last, they reached the steel door that was encrypted in several layers. "You two aren't going to be happy about this, but Hawks brought back the Green Devil alive." That revelation caused the parents to blow up, just as he had predicted. Coughing up blood, Toshi screamed, He what?" When Inko cried out, "But the footage, he stabbed him." Tsukachi shook his head. "Why the hell would he do that? He's a psychopath with no regard for anyone else," shouted All Might. Tsukachi had just completed the door's unlocking. "He's in here, unconscious and weak from the battle. His arms are in especially bad shape thanks to you, All Might. Once I open this door and you get a proper look at the kid, I'll let you do whatever you think is best." All Might remarked, "You know, maybe this is a blessing in disguise," which made Tsukachi feel nauseous. "That monster has done nothing but ruin our family. He will suffer before he is locked away in Tartarus for the rest of his life." The door opens. In what seemed like an operating room, Toshinori buffed himself into his All Might form and rushed to the lone bed. The bed's occupant was completely covered by a blanket. With no smile on his face, All Might said to the unconscious body, "Well now, isn't this an ironic turn of events?" Like most days when he lived with the Yagi family, the boy thought to be capable of burning this world to ash now lies broken and pathetic. Tsukachi detested the length of time All Might was taking on this. His voice was trembling as he replied, "Once I've identified him, what happens next is up to you." With his hand on the blanket, All Might prepared to tear. He pulled back his right hand and remarked, "Understood. I'm quite eager to see who is behind all the pain and misery." The blanket was torn from the corpse like a flash. The real face of the Green Devil was clearly visible. As All Might started to deflate, he exclaimed, What? It can't be. That's impossible. He nearly lost all of his power. A feather might have easily knocked the scrawny guy to the ground. Black and green hair. At the same time, Inko felt like crying, yelling, and throwing up. He's diamond-shaped black freckles. The wound he sustained from grazing against All Might's fist caused the thin scar from the cut Teleki gave him to enlarge. It's him. They both yelled, Izuku, without observing the boy's face contort significantly. Inko sobbed in front of the bed, how, when, what, my boy, my poor boy, on her knees. With his hands in his hair, Toshinori was turning and tossing. How is this? No, this can't be him, he's quirkless. A few minutes later, Sukachi made the decision to fill in certain gaps. He clarified that tests were conducted. Have you ever heard of the quirk doomsday theory? Powers mixing and growing in strength and complexity. Izuku's quirk is the combination of a mind-related quirk, for instance, telekinesis, and a fire-based quirk. He awakened his power, which he calls psycho flames, after some extreme emotional turmoil, and it's grown at an unprecedented rate. A quirk growth spurt, the first one we've seen. Severe emotional upheaval. That was what caught their attention. What he endured in that house was still unknown to the naive fools. Resentments that accumulated till they burst forth from him and into the world. Sukachi took out a few documents and gave them to All Might and Inko. Too teary-eyed to read them, Toshinori questioned. What are these? DNA tests, stated Sukachi. His blood, Inko's and Izumi's. 99.9% match with both. The two parents sensed that their world was being upended. They gazed at Izuku while tears streamed down his still face. They failed to detect that his heart rate was rising rapidly. But Sukachi saw it. What? Is he aware that it is them? He can't. No, he is unable to perceive our temperature energy, thus his quirk is shut. Toshinori's voice was hardly audible above a whisper as he said, our son is dead. The shattered man who won't accept reality says, this must be one of All for One's disgusting lies. Sukachi put a hand on his pal's shoulders and shook his head. He recommended that they go home since it was obvious that they needed time to process things. Inko touched her son's hair before she left. It was an error. Izuku's back arched, his breathing became labored, and his heart rate increased as soon as she made direct contact. The three people around him jumped as he gritted his teeth as if he were having difficulty. When the doctors gathered around Izuku, Inko and Toshinori were hurried out of the room and told, visiting hours are over, doctors. His heart was still beating in his chest, and he was jerking with his jaws clenched. Wait! Cried Toshinori. My son! Exclaimed Inko. Pushing them back to the elevator, Sukachi argued, it's too dangerous for you right now. After that, Sukachi hurried back to Izuku and was startled to discover. He showed no signs of awakening, his pulse rate remained constant, and he remained unconscious. He was aware. He knew it was his parents, although I'm not sure how. Even with his damaged body and all the anesthesia, his hatred for them is so great that it nearly brought him back to life. One of the doctors called for Sukachi's attention. The detective had a new look of fear on his face as he said, Sir, we have new cause for concern. The tears that landed on him. They evaporated. He used his quirk. Izuku's ability to do quirks is so strong that the cuffs they are using on him cannot make him totally helpless. Now what? Izuku said, yeah, before becoming still. Even though Sukachi said it was a bad idea, Inko and Toshinori continued to visit Izuku every week for the next few weeks. In contrast to the first time, he would begin to shake as soon as they walked into the room, his heart would race, and he would nearly wake up. They were no longer able to remain on the same floor as him without experiencing these near awakenings. January 28th. He's absurdly powerful, unstable, and we don't have a single surefire way of stopping him should he recover and go on another rampage, Sukachi stated. But he's capable of remorse and guilt, and the only reason he hasn't ended it all is because he wants to atone. And there are certain people who should see the full picture, Hawks responded. What should be done with Izuku was the subject of their conversation. Above Izuku, Hawks, Sukachi, Midnight, Mount Lady, Ryukyu, and Mirko were in the viewing conference room. I'd say we've got roughly a month before Izuku is healthy enough to move, but we're discussing this now. Sukachi stated. Midnight stated, I'm in favor of rehabilitating him. When I met Izuku, he looked so sad and lonely, and seeing what it did to him. Is locking him up really a good idea? His family pushed him away and look what happened. Mount Lady held up a hand. I knew him as Zu, during his early vigilante days. He looked pretty troubled, but not a lost cause. Ryukyu let out a sigh. Everyone was shocked by Ryukyu's statement. In all honesty, I'm surprised we haven't gotten the order to execute him. Yes, he's a hurt child at his core, but we're tackling years of pain and suffering. That doesn't just go away. And every day he's alive he only gets stronger. How long until he's unstoppable? Mirko grinned and added, when that happens, he'll be on our side, or at least not looking to kill innocent people. Everyone knew she only wanted the opportunity to engage in a real fight with the Green Devil, so she said, so he's got issues, why not have him take them out on a punching bag? That's what I do. Isn't he close to Mrs. Todoroki? They've spent extensive time together, maybe she could, I dunno, talk to him? Mount Lady offered. Hawks gave a small smile. Yeah, Ray might be the closest thing to a mom he has. But she's not completely mentally stable either. And how are we gonna break the news to Endeavor? Hey Endeavor, your wife's mothering the child murderer that almost killed you. How are the kids? Sounds like another disaster waiting to happen. Tsukachi and Hawks appeared undecided. I know this shouldn't even be an option, but what about his family? We've seen Inko and all might want to change things, so maybe. Kirsch. Over the intercom, the doctor keeping watch over Izuku could be heard. He sounded trembling and afraid. Tsukachi hurried to open the shutters to Izuku's room and discovered the boy completely awake and out of bed. Sorry to interrupt, but a new party W would like to join the conversation. Oh shit. The first to leap into action was Mirko, who kicked straight through the glass and entered the room. Hawks took Tsukachi and Midnight down with him. Izuku was just about standing. They could see he was having trouble breathing because his oxygen mask was off. Tsukachi questioned the two physicians at the other end of the room, what happened? We discussed briefly the potential of him seeing his parents, and he instantly woke up and exclaimed, I'd rather die. We were thinking about what you might decide to do with him, the doctor explained. Izuku opened his mouth and spoke, his voice scratchy and exhausted with lengthy gasps in between. Take me. He said, unsure of what to do. Get Midnight to sedate him, talk to him, or execute him. Whatever they do will have far-reaching implications. To Tartarus. There was no logic with him, yet everyone was stunned by what he had just said. Izuku, you do know what you're asking for, right? Midnight's explanation did not deter him. Middle school all over again. Tartarus is a cesspool full of deranged villains. You'll be surrounded by violent lunatics for the rest of your days. There will be guards, at least. He and Hawks suddenly looked threatened, but Izuku's words just confused everyone else in the room. Tsukachi spoke up, reminding him of the childhood that spit out what they see before him. Izuku, get back in bed, we can discuss this later. One for all. Izuku interrupted, forcing Tsukachi to stop talking. I am aware of All Might, giving his peculiarity to Yagi. All for One can be stopped by the crystallized power that is in the hands of that incompetent kid. Additionally, unless you imprison me in Tartarus. What's stopping me from telling others about it? Your armies are much weaker than they once were. Now that I'm gone, the bad guys are itching to go out there. Power isn't just sought after by evil. Instead of me, the world will hunt the Yagis. And you'll have just as much of their blood on your hands as mine. Izuku's tired yet volatile glare paralyzed everyone, and his green eyes stared into them with unwavering resolve. Midnight used her quirk to put him to sleep, and everyone covered their noses to keep awake, but Izuku didn't fight back. The dominatrix caught him as he fell, holding his limp body close. Tsukachi. She glanced at the detective behind her, who appeared the most shaken of them all. Izuku's gift of being able to spot lies could sometimes be a curse, since he would sicken the world on his family if they didn't give him what he wanted. He's not just dangerous because of his power, knowledge can be a deadly weapon, too. Fine, we'll take you to Tartarus, but only until you've cooled your head, Hawks said glumly as he flew back to the meeting room, saying, Tartarus it is, then. I gotta make a call. Hawks left the room and stood outside the door. As his phone rang, Hawks continued to proceed but paused outside the room in front of two chairs. I assume you heard all that? Hawks took something from his jacket and handed it to Inko and Toshinori, who remained motionless, and said, I bookmarked the important pages. He said, read them carefully, and turned to leave. With their eyes focused on the cover, Inko and Toshi gazed down at the burned book in their hands written by Izuku. Not a villain or a hero, the watchdog the night he fled, they turned to the first page. The words, peace, hope, and relief, were all that blossomed in Japan as the pyromaniac that had been plaguing the country for more than a year finally came to an end, allowing people to return to their homes after spending more than a year in emergency shelters. Unfortunately, many people lost their homes and loved ones during his rampage, and the remaining heroes were mostly assigned to missing person cases. People could finally rest easy knowing that their country was well, not precisely Securia but far safer than it had been in the past, safe enough even for foreign tourists. Of course, there are still villains and crooks. The mighty tower, whoa, Uncle Might's agency, then, It's so cool that you guys got to stay here instead of a shelter, Melissa exclaimed, her eyes bouncing around the agency like light off a series of mirrors. Her roommates, Izumi and Katsuki, weren't quite as excited, as they appeared to be stewing for some reason. Her mates were largely ignoring the upbeat blonde, who sighed and addressed the obvious. Yeah, I know. The fact that he and Aunt Inko are retiring still amazes me. They've been doing it since before we were even born. Melissa had unintentionally caused another wound. Izumi gripped her right arm and snarled, yeah, and his last combat was with that lunatic. Damn it, I was really excited to blow that guy away, Katsuki growled. How did the equipment I made you turn out? Was it beneficial? Izumi looked down, her hair casting shadows over her eyes. I built those gauntlets as best I could while recalling your design specifications. What's wrong? Izumi and Katsuki informed Melissa of the green-haired girl's hospital results, stating that her body was steadily deteriorating and that she probably wouldn't have a future as a hero. Unlike them, Melissa tried to come up with ways to counteract this development, including diet changes, special medications, and possibly even cybernetic enhancements. Little did she know it, but the blonde American had gone into a full-on muttering spree. Her movements in the air, as if she were tapping and swiping on a holographic screen, were similar to Izuku's analysis of quirks, except that he traced his finger on his palm as he would write in a notebook. Stop talking. Melissa was startled out of her rant by Bakugo's shout, mumbling gibberish won't help with this. The blonde just sat there in despair as Bakugo bounded out of the room, followed by Izumi, who said she needed some fresh air and didn't even try to comfort Melissa or thank her for coming up with answers to her problem. I'll give them some time. I'll just call Dad. They lost their mentors, and a villain attacked them. Household of Todoroki. What? Endeavor had just received the news that All Might and Teleki had agreed to retire as public heroes. All Might would continue to teach at UA, but Inko was completely retired. The news was particularly shocking to Endeavor because it meant he was now the #1 hero, claiming the title he had worked his entire life to earn. But all he felt was frustration because it wasn't earned, but rather because All Might was resigning himself. Technically, Hawks was the one who stopped the Green Devil while he was being battered to the ground. Endeavor, you are currently our greatest hero, even if I realize it is shameful to inherit it in this manner. Given how valiantly you battled, everyone will. Endeavor interrupted the detective, saying, put All Might on the phone now, Tsukachi. Enji was a very perceptive man, and he understood All Might better than most people would think of him. He knew that something else was going on, and he had a suspicion that it had something to do with the Green Devil. Endeavor heard shuffling, and then All Might's voice. He was, predictably, in the same location as Tsukachi. Talk about the true reason you decided to retire. All Might sighed, explaining that he broke far more easily than Endeavor had anticipated. Your body hasn't deteriorated to the point of being useless, and don't give me crap about wanting to focus on teaching. The Todoroki siblings were eating dinner and watching the news while Endeavor listened to All Might's story. Shoto was eerily silent and had a hideous frown on his face. So, Shoto, aren't you glad the Green Devil is finally gone? How is it working with heroes and kids your age? Fuyumi said, but all she got was a little snarl. Natsuo inquired, and Shoto retorted icily, annoying. The end of the Devil's Hell. People throughout Japan are expressing their relief and appreciation to the courageous individuals who risked their lives to protect us. Every day, our beloved Musutafu gets closer to becoming its tranquil self again. I've heard that a big prison carrier is flying over the ocean on its way to the super jail Tartarus, so the heroes haven't been slacking. No matter how many villains and criminals it is carrying, they will never be seen again. After finishing his meal, Shoto got up and declared, I'm going to bed. The Green Devil was Izuku Yagi, All Might and Teleki's presumed dead son, and he was so horribly beaten down by the world and his own family that he fled and became a vigilante. But even then, his suffering persisted, shaping him into the terror that almost tore Japan apart. Hawks kept him alive, and he was scheduled to be imprisoned at Tartarus. It was unimaginably worse than Endeavor could have imagined. I apologize. I know I caused this. It might not be the finest idea to keep him alive in this manner, but Endeavor interrupted, saying, shut up, but his voice wasn't a yella. In fact, he hadn't yelled since All Might was put on the phone. He sighed and resumed, do whatever you want with your family, but the fact remains that you were directly involved in the boy's descent, which resulted in the loss of several thousand lives. Thus, assume accountability. Keep an eye on him at all times, or you'll have to spend a lot more. Before All Might could answer, Endeavor hung up and turned to face the flowers that adorned his walkway, which was Rei's favorite. You're not the only one who has wrongs to make right, he said, and he remained there for a few long moments before returning to his house, passing an irate Shoto as he entered. They didn't speak, but his glare made it obvious that he wasn't in the mood for words, and Enji was all too familiar with the expression in his eyes. The blue flame user is next, was Shoto and Enji's only thinking before they went to bed that night. Really? Imajiki questioned. No way, really, you guys, I saw him. Togoda said. He was the size of a first year and all angsty, Najire said to her friends. Even though I was there, Ryukyu won't tell me anything more about Hima. He was Teleki's missing child. I'm really interested. Why was the child of a hero so mean? Why did he have such a strong quirk if he had no quirks? Can he do anything else? Hawks appeared to be familiar with him. Even at midnight? Are they old friends? I have a ton of questions. After that life-altering experience, the soon-to-be third-year students were merely relieved that at least one of them was still herself, but one question from her motor mouth struck out to them as Najire launched into another questioning spiral that Togoda and Imajiki were accustomed to. Why did Hawks act as though he had been killed? Quote, he did what? Can you guys keep a secret? Shouted Imajiki and Togoda, and Najire instantly covered her mouth. Najire demanded answers, and she was bursting with inquiries. Also, don't tell Ryukyu, she added. It's finished. He is no longer there. The Green Devil is no more, ladies and gentlemen. Hawks hit the game-winning blow. We're out of hell now. This is the end of the devil. Momo watched the first report of the Green Devil's death every day with mixed feelings, not sure if she should be relieved, thrilled, or it's for the best, he will haunt no one else. The report was played on a tablet in the Yayorozu daughter's bedroom. The nightmares of her parents holding her still as she took her last breath were the worst. As the months after that traumatic event went by, the nightmares became less frequent, but they were replaced by new dreams, recurrent memories, and new emotions. Instead of fear and terror, she woke up feeling discouraged. Momo's hand went to gently grasp her neck, and occasionally she felt the sensation of the devil's flames coiling around her neck. His voice when he spoke to me sounded hurt. He didn't choose to live the way he did. It's good that he has been stopped. But was death really the answer? His eyes looked so miserable, like he despised himself. The image of those cold, dark green eyes flashed through her mind again, but this time it was clearer. A scar, freckles, and messy black and white hair. For some reason, every time she thought of those eyes without realizing it, it brought to mind Zu or the Green Devil, and his words would reverberate in his mind. A sheltered creature like you doesn't know the first thing about me. He lived in hell on earth even before the Green Devil terrorized Japan, Momo said, putting her face in her hands and letting out a sigh. He has no one to support him, an awful family, and bullies. Be alright, Zu. I hope you find someone who can assist you if you are. Aircraft of Tartarus transportation on its way to the fortress built to house the worst villains Japan had ever seen. A large black aircraft flew over the seas, resembling a bird of prey with its wide-span wings that held its propellers, sharp nose, and cargo spacious enough to carry 100. Worst of all, its quirk-canceling cuffs prevented any of the inmates from using their powers, and even though it had the capacity for many, the precautions were taken for only one. The person aboard this jailbird is the one who almost won a battle against Japan's forces, the one who could have destroyed the world from the inside out, the hellish terror to which countless heroes and villains died, and yet the real reason they defeated him was because he was exhausted and neglected to take care of himself. It took all of their strength to defeat an opponent who was ill, and they barely made it through the end. If he had been healthy, the heroes would have lost the final battle. I can outfly this bird, says 100,000. In the seat next to the pilot, Hawks remarked, you know, hawks are faster than eagles. After we drop off this little monster, the pilot added, we can race to the mainland and back. When is he going to wake up? Doctors said days after we drop him off. Hawks waved his hand dismissively. But the kid has a knack for surpassing expectations. Hawks got up to check the door when there was a knock. Hawks and Tsukachi came up to him as he opened his eyes and stirred, and Hawks said, welcome to the world of the living, clone. Hawks got a glare from Tsukachi in midnight, and Izuku just closed his eyes. Hey, sorry. Hawks laughed. In the holding area, there was a single bed with a black and green-haired child strapped to it in handcuffs, under the watchful eye of the R-rated heroine. Midnight. Izuku was high in the air and unable to employ psycho flames when he opened his eyes once more and cocked his head, seeing a window beyond midnight with the horizon in view. A first-class flight to your island hideaway, pre-fantastic, huh? Hawks said, and Izuku took a big breath. Putting aside the jokes, Sukachi sat down in front of Izuku and looked at him intently. Before we land, I have some questions, if you don't mind. Izuku simply nodded. The notebook they seized provided them with a wealth of information about his mental state from that time to the present, but some questions remained unanswered. What do you know about Toya? It was the first time since he woke up that Izuku opened his mouth. Not much, he remarked in a husky voice, until Hawks and Mirko mentioned me. I had never heard that name. Sukachi nodded and said, but don't get your hopes up if you want me to talk about Rei. I know it has something of importance to Todoroki. He remarked in a menacing tone, and Midnight put her hand on his shoulder. Izuku's shoulder trembled at the contact, and she quickly withdrew her hand. Don't worry, nobody who has been good to you is going to get dragged down. All right, tell me about the man you met shortly after the battle with Endeavor. He was telling the truth. Sukachi verified. Just a raspy voice, purple patches under his eyes, and intense heat. Izuku shook his head. Detective Mori, a man with green skin and two antennas on his head, was my partner. Because of his peculiarity, he was able to glimpse memories and see into people's minds, as well as create copies of them in viewable media. We eventually located his burned body after he vanished. Are you familiar with that? To Sukachi's relief and dismay, Izuku delivered the truth while maintaining eye contact and denying any knowledge of it. This one is sensitive. How did you intend to murder all for one? Izuku's eyes became squinted in a hard glare at the ceiling. He answered in one resounding word. Self-destruct. He's been ready to die all along, and he was hoping to take all for one down with him. This surprised the detective and heroes into silence, and they flew in stillness, the atmosphere heavy. To everyone's attention, Izuku said, Doomsday. You compared me to the Quirk Doomsday theory, I've read about it. Sukachi's eyes opened. He was awake enough to hear that. Over the course of generations, peculiarities blend and change. They eventually become so strong and sophisticated that humans is unable to control them, which results in catastrophe. Izuku turned to Hawks and said, You've seen what I can do, extreme firepower in an unstable package. So why am I still alive? You know, you don't have to control everything, the wing hero said, keeping his gaze fixed on him. Additionally, I think it's preferable to make peace with the things you can't control. They finally touched down. Izuku sneered and closed his eyes, saying, Besides, you never know, you might be a beacon of light for someone else like you. As if there's anyone out there like me. Tartarus's Counter Quirk Maximum Security Prison 10:30 a.m. on February 6th. Prisoners are divided into cell blocks, each deeper underwater than the last, and in the event of a major emergency, they may be flooded, drowning the inmates before they reach the surface. The inmates are arranged in their blocks according to the seriousness of their crimes and the danger of their abilities. The worse the inmate, the deeper they are buried. 5 kilometers off the mainland, it may seem like just another out-of-sight prison, but in practice, it's a dumping ground for the government to send those they consider a serious threat to society. Izuku was unbuckled from his bed, but they kept the handcuffs on him. They put a quirk suppressant cuff on his ankle after they got inside, and Sukachi excused himself to go to another room. The plane landed on a landing strip close to the south exit, where its passengers were met and led inside by 4 armed guards. Apparently, having 2 pros and a policeman wasn't enough insurance already. Are they not present? I've had a burning in my chest since we landed, Izuku said, causing the detective to halt in his tracks. Izuku's eyes were a chilly, black gaze, and a vein throbbed on his forehead. They're here. Sukachi was genuinely shocked. The cuff on his ankle was made to restrict powers more effectively than those in the hospital, so he shouldn't be able to do this unless it's pure, unadulterated hatred rather than a quirk. Sukachi only nodded weakly, which caused Izuku to growl. With no room for argument, he said, Put me on the lowest level. Planned on it, now walk, psycho. A guard pointed at the boy's back, and he didn't even bat an eye. Sukachi sighed before heading to a security room, where they were, exactly as Izuku had said, watching, listening, crying, and mourning. Izuku. Inko mumbled, Toshinori's head drooping in humiliation and self-disgust. After all these months, Inko and Toshinori were still in shock over what had happened to their kid and what their parenting had done to them. The lowest level Izuku was moving quietly down the corridors when inmates occasionally glanced out their windows to see a child in chains, surrounded by guards and professionals. A child? Huh? Really? Is this a field trip for school? Hey, brat, on your way to kindergarten, you got lost. Did you take the wrong bus? Hey, youngster. I will turn you into my bitch. This was far better than the scorching sensation back up on the surface, but Izuku ignored these madmen and continued to stroll until one of the inmates managed to get under his skin. When you were taken, How much did your mother cry? The inmate actually backed up when he saw Izuku's eyes, which seemed to gleam demonically beneath the darkness of his hair, as his face twisted into a horrible look of rage and he shot them at the cell to his left. Bam! A gunshot reverberated throughout the cell block, causing everything to become silent. Silence, you animals, or someone's head is being penetrated by the following bullet. After the threat, everyone naturally fell silent. Aside from one. You must be the youngest person ever to be locked up here, Hawks said to Izuku, who didn't even glance at him or say anything. Your first 5 minutes here, and you're already pretty popular. Isn't it a nice way to start a conversation? You're breaking records here, dude. Still no response. Midnight poked Hawks in the side with her elbow. Finally, he gave up trying to make things lighthearted. I'm sorry, this is my fault, he said. And you delivered, Izuku said, finally responding to the bird. I promised I'd help you build a better life. You kept your word. Thank you. Hawks and Midnight were completely taken aback. They thought that living in a prison full of the worst criminals in society was better than their previous lives. This isn't entirely incorrect. It's like middle school, except that Bakugo and the Yagi weren't there, and the staff wouldn't let him fight. They mostly have suspicions and guesses about the life he led before, and because Yaoyorozu shut down Aldera, they could at least conclude that Izuku's time in school was terrible. Midnight, Hawks, and the others who read his notebook only know half of his story. He only began writing it the night he fled, providing only bare-bones details about his home life, indicating that he wanted to leave that part of his life behind. When they finally stopped at their destination, Izuku was intrigued by a voice coming from the other side, but he didn't look up at his door. When Izuku looked up, he saw purple eyes. Well, this is surprising, a woman's voice remarked. I was sure you'd come back to me as a plate of crispy wings. Hawks laughed. Glad to hear you had so much faith in me. Are you going to tell the child? She said. I recognize you. Izuku said cryptically as he noticed a woman with shoulder-length pink and indigo hair in the window. Hawks grinned. Izuku is pleased to meet Lady Nagant, your new cellmate and the lady I replaced. Return? Nagant and Izuku inquired. It was surprising enough that some brat was thrown in there, but on the lowest level? Could he really be? Hawks had somehow managed to do something that was against the rules at Tartarus. Get 2 prisoners' clearance to share a cell. That's why Nagant was recently moved to the lowest level. She thought it was a sign the Hero Public Safety Commission was getting jumpy, but she never would have expected this. The door was already open as Nagant began to complain, and Izuku was pushed inside before either of them could object. Enjoy yourself inside, and be kind to each other, you two. Nagant frowned and said, What the hell are you up to now, replacement? Hawks waved while grinning and closing his eyes. That word caused Izuku's eyes to widen a little. She has one, too. Nagant's eyes widened as she turned to face the sullen teenager behind her. Izuku here is. Well, was the Green Devil? Midnight said as she approached the window. Seriously? And Kana here? She inquired, sounding almost disinterested. Hawks then spoke. Quirk. Sniper. Former Public Safety Commission hero. Lady Nagant. You can rip out your 2-toned hair and convert it into ammunition, and your right arm becomes a gun. Izuku shocked everyone with his level of knowledge by revealing, you were arrested for allegedly killing fellow heroes. Yes, goodbye. Are you certain you're going to put them in there? Hawks waved, followed by Midnight and the guards. Not at all. But perhaps it will be beneficial for them to have someone who understands their suffering, he replied with a broad smile. That's just the way it was with Rei. So you also have one? A replacement? Izuku inquired, perplexing Lady Nagant. Yeah, he keeps swinging by just to get on my nerves, Nagant said, leaning against the door with a groan. I don't even bother telling him to get out now. He's a good child, but he's really bothersome. How does yours look? I've never met her, Izuku moaned. The fact that she is close to my family makes it odd. As far as I can tell, she's a tech gal who wants to help heroes. So what's the sniper hero doing in a place like this? Nagant moaned and collapsed to the floor. What is the truth about you? Titles don't have a place here, so drop the hero name calling, Izuku. The kid settled down. Have it your way, Kana. Room of surveillance. You see, Hawks remarked, they're already getting along. All save Inko and Toshinori grimaced. You placed him in the same room as a criminal with a conviction. Do you need me to remind you that he has done far worse than she has? Inko yelled. Inko couldn't argue with the public's belief that he deserves to die because, unlike Nagant, he has done enough. What keeps him in handcuffs? Toshinori said. The others in there aren't. Sukachi responded. Izuku asked them to keep the cuffs on. to keep him from, quote, wringing the throats of any scumbag who could be useful. Overall, he doesn't trust himself anymore, but part of him is still hunting all for one. If Izuku is going to lose it, he will at least be somewhat restrained. What else does society's future hold if a 15-year-old is imprisoned in a fortress with some of the worst people on the planet? Tartarus. The prison with extremely strong security. No one who is ever imprisoned up here is said to survive. If you asked the prisoners about their forced living conditions, they would probably say something like, "Get me out of this hellhole," or, "I'll tear apart the bastards keeping me locked in here." However, if you asked the newest prisoner, he would answer, "I can finally get some semblance of peace." He would likely agree with you if you thought he was crazy for stating this, but Izuku was actually finding his place to be rather comfortable. The most of the prisoners left him alone, there were guards to prevent fights, and everything was quiet. That's because Izuku is the only one who can somewhat utilize his oddity. To a very little degree. He gives a sharp gaze to anyone who manages to penetrate his icy, unyielding section aid. His eyes briefly shine with the terrible strength of his peculiarity. He was the only one of the dangerous, strong scumbags in that madhouse whose power was not entirely confined. Most of the other bastards will be off his back after that. Except for his cellmate, whom he had suddenly come to like. Lady Nagant, also known as Kana Tsutsumi. Hawks had gotten them both trapped together in a small jail. They had nothing else to do, so they began to converse. Nagant served as a pawn in the smooth operation of Hero Society. The unfortunate reality is that men are not all made equal. The sadder reality is that the Hero Society that everyone looks up to as a positive force is merely a flimsy delusion. The number of corrupt hero organizations that the former Hero Public Safety Commission Hero had to eliminate in order to maintain this deception was too numerous to count. She was surprised to learn that Izuku was well versed on the subject. Kindergarten through middle school, his parents, his sister, and his friend. Tormented for heroic aspirations, ridiculed for seeming oddity. Both of them were crushed by the world, constant hypocrisy, and the lack of any obvious path to the future they had dreamed of as children. Who would have thought that for these 15 and 22-year-olds to finally find common ground, they would need to be arrested? They had never considered getting along, yet it happened right away when they exchanged stories. They spent hours discussing society, their families, whether they had taken different routes, and whether they had met in different situations. Kana's anger toward Izuku's family was understandable. In addition to being the epitome of everything she detested in heroes, they also killed whatever hope that her replacement had given her that things were getting better. The monster that almost brought Japan to its knees was created by his successor, the face of Hero Society. Additionally, Izuku would roll up his sleeves and gaze at his naked arms each night. His hands, fingers, and limbs were horribly disfigured. All Might engraved a permanent memento of his past into his body. Usually his hatred heated up so intensely that flames erupted from the gaps between his clenched teeth or from the corners of his eyes. Some would argue that it was needless and bad to remind oneself of one's pain and to feed one's resentment. Kana, however, would not agree. The past has already occurred. It happened regardless of how unsightly it is or how deeply you attempt to deny it. Past offenses should be punished, and it should not be forgotten. In her opinion, Izuku's carrying these reminders with him was a positive thing. In order for him to remember the wrongdoers and their actions. Heroes usually preach justice, don't they? That all crimes have to be compensated for, even when blood is involved. Between them, things weren't always bleak. Twice a week, Midnight and Hawks paid them a visit. The inmates initially remained silent, but they finally opened up enough to engage in lengthy discussions. Izuku and Kana appreciated the visits, though it was difficult to persuade them to acknowledge it. Rarely did they discuss what was happening beyond the fortified walls of Tartarus. After civilization started to recover, it seems that more than a dozen heroes made the decision to retire. They had numerous days when they believed they would perish during the havoc the Green Devil brought, and the public wasn't always on their side. A far cry from what they had envisioned their ideal work to be. Nevertheless, they persisted until the big evil was down. For such, some recognition is required. Teleki and, surprisingly, All Might are among the retired heroes. One of Izuku's biggest abusers was the man who had dominated for decades, the world's greatest hero. Izuku doesn't give a damn about what happens to him, yet every time people applaud him, a scorching sensation appears in his chest. Given that he still intends to teach at UA, he was aware that they were still praising him. Endeavor is the new de facto leader, which will further fuel the flames beneath him. Although Midnight and Hawks are technically prohibited from sharing any information about the outside world with dangerous inmates, They may be allowed to do so because Izuku and Kana have sworn to silence and aren't a communicative couple. The only person who made a request in exchange for being silent was Izuku. Make sure Toshinori and Inko Yagi never step foot on this island so long as I'm in it. The two inmate friends were currently sleeping on Kana's bed, back to back. When Hawks tossed Izuku in her cell, he had forgotten one small detail. There was only one bed. However, they didn't argue or do anything else. Back to back, without a doubt. Their hairs did, however, occasionally brush against each other's skin. Izuku saw that Kana's hair was surprisingly silky for a substance used to make bullets. Izuku should have had rough, spiky hair due to his peculiarity. The jailbirds were awakened by a sudden bang against their cell door. A guard's voice roused. It was early even for Hawks. Rise and shine, inmates. You've got company. He was unlikely to be that thrilled to see the jailbirds, and it was unlikely that midnight would arrive first thing in the morning. Just the kid, and it's not the bird or the stripper. Izuku and Kana both gave the guard a few menacing glares. He yelled, "Let's go already, brat." Instead, Izuku rose and made his way to the entrance. He had weighted shackles fastened to his wrists the moment it opened, as is customary for prisoners hosting guests. Izuku had a gun aimed right at his neck the entire time. He was considered the most dangerous prisoner since he was the only one who could use their peculiarity. The guard's extra jitters around a child are kind of hilarious. Izuku pondered who was paying him a visit if it wasn't Hawks or Midnight as they strolled in quiet. His parents. Know when they're close, he normally gets a sharp burning sensation in his chest, and he made it obvious that introducing them would be disastrous. Tsukachi? Probably, but since he was imprisoned, Izuku hasn't seen his face. Additionally, people went missing when he was free, so the cops had to be quite busy. Either evildoers abducting people for ransom or fools who believe that a social breakdown will allow them to change the world. Well, he'll find out soon enough. A smooth, high voice remarked, "Good morning, Izuku. How are you? Well, I hope." Izuku was unsure of how to react to that. A tiny animal with white fur, dressed in a suit, coat, and hat, was visible on the other side of the bulletproof glass. He had a mouse's head, dog-like paws, a tiny tail, and a scar over his right eye. Izuku said, "I'm sorry, who and what are you?" And the beast in front of him grinned in formal attire. "A cheerful, good question," he exclaimed. His catchphrase was undoubtedly, "I could a dog, a bear, a cat, or a mouse, but what you need to know is that I'm the principal of UA High." Above all, the UA principal, directly in front of him sat the head of Japan's leading hero school. The school that gave birth to such great heroes as Teleki, Endeavor, and All Power. During one period of his life, Izuku would have mumbled excitedly about how wonderful the school is. However, he is very different from that hopeful person. Izuku's face changed from one of amazement to one of frown. Nezu maintained his kind grin despite his expectations. "It seems you're not the biggest fan of our school given some of our past graduates and my choice in staff. But it's thanks to one of them that I'm here. Midnight told me about how your demeanor has changed." Izuku arched his brow. Izuku's eyes widened immediately as he said, "Let me get straight to the point. I'm here with a proposition for you. How would you like to leave Tartarus? I'm not offering you complete freedom, at least not yet. You will attend UA as a student so that we may keep a close eye on you ourselves." Izuku thought someone was playing a trick on him. Attending a hero school of him, the Green Devil, one of the most dreaded individuals to ever haunt Japan? Nezu sensed his incredulity and went on. "I understand why you might be skeptical, especially with some my chosen staff, but no one will intentionally provoke you. You will be under our protection like any other student. You will be placed in Class 1A under Shota Aizawa's Vigilant Watch. You may know him as Eraserhead. You will need to complete an application exam, like the other students, and then there's—" Izuku interrupted, "Don't get ahead of yourself, you're talking as if I agreed with your proposition. Even if I wanted to go with you, how could I? Izuku Yagi is dead, but Izuku is not," Nezu responded. "And as for why I'm doing this, which I'm sure you're also wondering. You're going to resent me for saying this, but you and All Might are alike." Nezu had it right. Izuku gritted his teeth and scowled with increasing intensity as soon as he stated it. The principal, however, refused to back down. "You both have committed terrible acts. Along with being a neglectful, psychologically abusive father to you, he allowed Katsuki Bakugo and Izumi Yagi to participate in hero work before we were even at that point of desperation. And it was their actions that pushed you to become the Green Devil. But regardless of the past, they still desire to bring a positive impact to the world. That's why I allowed All Might to teach, on the condition he straighten out Bakugo and Yagi. It's why I'm here now, because I'd rather give you a chance to atone and live your life than let you rot and die full of pain. Izuku had his head down, staring at his bound hands after hearing Nezu's entire speech. He no longer scowled, and his hair hid his eyes. Principal, I am not that hero-worshipping fanboy anymore. Putting me in the hero course is a waste for someone with no desire to become a hero. You and I both know this has only 3 ways it can end. I'll end up on the streets again, or captured and thrown back in here for life, or executed successfully. What's more, society will lose even more faith in heroes. The Green Devil coming back from the dead, first seen at UA. Nezu gave a nod. You make good points. There are pros and disastrous cons in what I'm offering you, and I guess in the end, I can't force you to make a choice. It's up to you what you want to do, no one telling you otherwise, but know that you can become a hero. Izuku gritted his teeth and considered his alternatives. What would UA have in store for him? Definitely Bakugo and the Yagas. Is Toshinori correcting them? As if that's what the one who spoilt them the most can do. Most likely, nothing has changed. Hawks is undoubtedly aware of all of this, and he is at least certain that Midnight will be present. However, what if his peers are exactly the same as those in Aldera? Izuku is certain that he can control his quirk and hide it with something else, but he's going to be furious with UA if he has to go through middle school again. To the ground as well. Izuku thought for a while before deciding. I'll go with you, on one condition. March 3rd, after nearly a month, Izuku took his first breath of fresh air. It was perhaps the final time he looked back as he stood outside Tartarus's high, thick walls. The quirk suppressant anklet and handcuffs were taken off him. He was once more in complete control of Psycho Flames. He was dressed casually in normal clothes, having abandoned his prisoner attire. He was unencumbered. However, he approached his party without using his peculiarity. Hawks, Midnight, and Nezu made up the group. How does it feel to be out of the cage, jailbirds? Hawks responded. Kana mockingly remarked, free to fly into a new cage? Exhilarating. That's correct, indeed. Izuku's only need is that Lady Nagant be permitted to depart as well, albeit with UA monitoring. Nezu approached Izuku and said, we have a gift for you, Izuku. Izuku rolled his eyes and said, hold out your hands. His forearms were slapped with a pair of sleek, silver metal arm bracers. Each one had tiny hatches to open, revealing tiny screens when they were open, and they felt light and cool. These are inhibitor gauntlets made from a brilliant scientist from my island. Nezu disclosed. Izuku's ears pricked up when that location was mentioned. His replacement is from there. Inhibitor. So they're designed to weaken his quirk? Kana responded. After seeing what he can do, it's not the law can just let him walk away with his full power, stated Midnight. Izuku made the decision to test the limits of his power. His eyes and hair were ablaze with green flames, as were his hands. I feel a little stronger than I was in the beginning. While keeping his hands burning, he shifted his flames to form a cross on his chest, saying, but I can still control the temperature. Then directed his firepower into wings that were smaller than his typical size. At last, he directed his palm toward the distant and let out a 15-meter emerald firewave. How much of my strength do these gauntlets seal? To which Nezu replied, 45%. Izuku thought that was strange. He should be significantly stronger than what he just shown, with little over half of his peak power. After being virtually quirkless for nearly a month, he couldn't have become that much weaker. Each. Nezu caught his eye once more. Yes, it makes more sense. Those gauntlets were programmed to hinder 45% of your power each, meaning you can only use 10% of your full power. 10%? The other kids will be on an even playing field as a result. With just half, I'd probably kill someone. Midnight approached him. This is just until we can trust you to be responsible with your quirk. No power usage in school outside of class, and you keep them on during hero training unless told otherwise. Izuku gave a nod. Izuku inquired, so what about living arrangements? Nezu responded, get in the car and I'll explain. While Midnight was driving and Nezu had called shotgun, Izuku and Kana sat in the backseat. The preference of Hawks was to fly. Izuku continued to look at the scenery as they passed. He could see cranes and reconstruction workers in every direction, either just finishing up or halfway through their work. During the voyage, he can clearly recall turning certain districts to ash. A dorm system? Asked Kana. The heroes discovered throughout the reconstruction process that their forces were further diminished and that there weren't quite enough heroes on the streets. Hero schools needed the dorms to keep its enrolled pupils safe. And you too will be staying with us in the teacher's dorm. Izuku, since you'll be a student, you'll eventually have to move into the student dorms. Try to get along with your classmates, and no room sharing. Without consent. Midnight didn't even say anything about the final bit. The plot for Izuku was explained in full by the R-rated heroine. They could set up a test for him even though he didn't take the February entrance exam. It's clear that he doesn't require battle testing because he can destroy his entire class by simply removing one of his gauntlets. Thus, his academic performance would be the main focus. Like he did when he was the Green Devil, they gave Izuku a new notebook in which to record his ideas, emotions, and experiences. He claimed that it also served as a means of remembering his father, Hisashi, who had taught him to read and write. They passed a recently remodeled playground on their way. Izuku's gaze remained focused on it as he recalled taking the Asui children to a playground and engaging in rehabilitative activities with Endeavor's daughter and their older sister. He searched but couldn't find any of them. However, he discovered another person he knew. A group of young children clap as a purpleette with long earlobes plays a wooden guitar. Kyoka. He heard Midnight say, "Zuku. Izuku." When they came to a stop sign, she chose to observe what captivated him. "Is that a person who is being examined? I believe her name was Jiro. You're going to have a fascinating year, Izuku." "I'm already thrilled to see him start his classes," Midnight thought as she drove away once more. The UA High School. Izuku gazed up at the epitome of hero schooling as the four got out of the automobile. When he was younger, he would have been a star-struck young man who was grateful to be on the property. He simply felt indifferent to the school today, though. Before going to the dorms, they needed to review a few things. As he greeted Izuku, the former Green Devil, Shota Aizawa, also known as Eraserhead, moaned, "Lovely. This year, I have 21 headaches." Erasure worked on him while wearing his gauntlets, as they had recently tested. Kana wanted to make sure she understood when she said, "You want me to teach this little shits?" She had no intention of simply moving to UA and be able to raise her feet. As with Izuku, there must have been a catch for her. She found it unexpected that she was expected to educate, even though it wasn't the most absurd idea considering the situation. She was imprisoned after being found guilty of a crime. She did not have the presumed dead cover as Izuku did. "That's right, and please refrain from calling them that," Midnight replied. Kana mocked the notion, saying, "And you want me to teach heroics? Seriously?" Even suggesting that she return to maintaining the image of a hypocritical world has left her with a sour taste for hero culture. To put it mildly, it made her nauseous. Izuku said, "It's not the worst idea. You've seen the ugly side of this world, and likely so have they thanks to me. They need someone give them a comprehensive insight into how corrupt and twisted these so-called heroes can be. Who better than you?" Lady Nagant seemed to consider it as she rubbed the back of her head and closed her eyes. Nezu entered at that point to complete the transaction. After giving the smiling chimera a quick glance, the sniper hero sighed in reluctant agreement and said, "I could always have you oversee Izuku's class." Midnight said, "Throw Izuku in as a package deal, and that's all it takes, huh?" At that moment, Kana aimed her sniper arm at the dominatrix while bending her right arm. She stopped talking after that. Put a hand on Kana's right shoulder and say, "I forgot to mention, no shooting fellow staff or students." The woman with the multicolored hair gave in and put away her built-in gun. As she did, a hero with a cowboy appearance entered Nezu's office through the open door. He trailed off as he became aware of the other people in the office. "Principal Nezu, if you've got a minute, there's something I wanna." The individual was immediately identified by Izuku as Snipe, another hero of long-range shooting. The cowboy hero gave a high-pitched squeal before anyone else could say another word. In an instant, he was standing in Nagant's private area, shaking her right hand ferociously. The apparent fanboy exclaimed, "Oh my god, oh my god. The Lady Nagant. I can't believe I'm meeting you in person." He was rushing around Lady Nagant and rapidly irritating her, having forgotten entirely what he had come to discuss, and that there were other people in the room. Whatever became of being envious of her? "I wonder," Aizawa asked himself. "It looks like both of our inmates have a fascinating year ahead of them." Midnight smirked as he thought. When Snipe the fanboy raked his fingers over Kana's hair and remarked on how silky it was, he went too far. The final straw was that. She pulled her sniper arm out and pointed it at her annoying admirer. Snipe continued to fanboy even though a rifle muzzle was inches from his face. Her eyes were twitching agitatedly as she questioned, "You sure I can't shoot this one?" For some reason, Izuku began to lose his temper and said, "I second that." Both Aizawa and Midnight answered, "No." However, Snipe. "Oh my god. I'd be so honored to be shot by the Lady Nagant, right here, on my right shoulder." Nagant said. "Y'all hear that?" As she curled a handful of hair like a bullet and removed it from her skull. "He doesn't mind." Aizawa and Midnight shouted, "No, this time." With Aizawa holding Snipe in his capture scarf and Izuku trailing behind, Midnight pulled the former HPSC hero away. He was not going anywhere, no matter how pitifully and passionately he attempted to follow Nagant. "I have a headache already, and the school year hasn't even begun," Aizawa thought. "I feel optimistic about this year," Nezu pondered cheerfully. Izuku and Kana needed to familiarize themselves with the school, so Midnight gave them a tour. They got to know the school guidance counselor, Hound Dog, along the way. Izuku would have to report to him at least twice a week from the beginning of the year until its conclusion. They eventually located Hawks as well, who was carrying a stack of books on his feathers. He let them all fall into Izuku's grasp. Izuku was no longer the weak, shy, timid, and oddball child he had been. He had to concede, however, that the stack of papers he was carrying was ridiculously heavy. That, plus a couple of novels Hawks thought he would enjoy, served as his entrance exam study material. They arrived at the teacher's dorm building on their final destination. Izuku noticed similar structures being built nearby. These were probably the dorms for other students. He entered what would become his new residence for the ensuing month and a half. They arrived in the room reserved for Izuku, Nagant, and their observers after riding the elevator. It was specifically made to accommodate 4 people, each of whom had a separate room. They discovered that the room was not empty when they entered. In the kitchen, a white-haired, rabbit-eared woman was helping herself to a carrot while a creamy blonde was preparing a cup of ramen. They both wore casual attire. Izuku said, "Mirko and Mount Lady." The other professionals took notice of that. "Oh hey, what took y'all so long?" the beaming Mirko said. Izuku was correct when he said, "I find it hard to believe these two are also teachers." It seems that they had to increase security a little after Izuku's demand that Nagant be released alongside him was granted. Hawks and Midnight were ready to keep an eye on Izuku, but they needed a few more hands to help him get better. The professionals would alternate between watching the jailbirds on different days. The stoic pair had no complaints to make. Midnight couldn't wait to show Izuku his already furnished room. There was a desk for him to work at, a bookshelf, a drawer, a closet, a bed in the corner, and a comfortable-looking sofa chair. He had a new laptop and phone on his desk for both personal and academic purposes. Only 2 sets of clothes were in his closet when he peered in. AUA and a gym uniform. Uniform for students. On the day of his arrest, Tartarus provided them with his bodily measurements. His own bathroom was on the other side of the room's door. The sound of a bath or shower is preferable to that of lakes or rivers in rain. In an optimistic tone, Midnight inquired, "So, how do you like it?" Izuku remained motionless, his lips unmoving and his back to her. "Izuku?" she inquired worriedly. Izuku wiped something from his eye with his hand. His voice cracked, "Aye." And he cleared his throat. He said, "I am grateful, really." Midnight scowled since she could see he was holding back on saying more. Izuku went and sat down on his bed, and Midnight sat down with him. "It's not good to force him to come out, at least not this early." Izuku said, "They'll be here too, won't they?" Midnight sighed, realizing who he was referring to. "Yes. They did remarkably well in the mock battle, and your dear old stepdad is still in their corner. There's nothing stopping you from coming out and saying they shouldn't be here." Izuku pondered the words of Midnight. He has the ability to ban them from all hero schools and ruin their heroic career. That would only be the beginning of the retaliation. "Let them come. Their egos will be the first part of them I crush," he said. "No, he prefers to take the long route. Toshinori and Inko probably have no idea what Azumi and Katsuki have done to him. He would like to concentrate on dismantling the brats himself first, but they will eventually learn. Like a good wine that improves over time. He will jump right in whenever he senses the moment is right." Midnight didn't argue against it, but it wasn't really heroic thinking. Although she was aware that she shouldn't have any preconceived notions as a teacher, she met Bakugo and Yagi and witnessed firsthand how terrible they were, especially to Izuku. She had a duty as a hero to ensure that justice was done, so why not have one of her hero students do it? Izuku inquired, "Midnight, how long do you think this will last?" "That depends on you. You could choose to believe what Bakugo and Yagi will say, and cut all this short. Or you can make your choice without letting them influence you anymore. This can last, do you know why? Because you can become a hero. I wholeheartedly believe that." Midnight ended by placing a hand on Izuku's shoulder. He winced but did not recoil. He actually leaned in close to her. "But the best things in life don't come easy. It'll take hard work, perseverance and a lot of studying. But you're not alone anymore. You have me, Hawks, Nezu, Nagant, and likely more to come when your classmates arrive. Izuku listened to every word while maintaining a steady gaze on the ground. Even though it was pleasant to hear all of this, he sensed that something was lacking. He started, "See, can I ask something?" Like Midnight's heart, his voice broke again. She compassionately gazed into his beautiful green eyes. According to her, anything. Izuku took a deep breath before responding. "I want to visit my mom and dad. I never imagined that I would return here." "Hello, Dad," Izuku said, standing on the roof of the hospital where his late father formerly worked. He stared at nothing while the wind blew in his hair. Flying all the way up to the roof, which was easy for him when he was at his best, required a very high amount of work. However, getting there was simple. Now he must confront his inner demons. He didn't offer up a prayer. He was at a loss for words to address his elderly father. He turns into the biggest terror our nation has ever seen after all the years of his promises to be a hero. In this life as well as the next, he cannot confront him. At the very least, he deserves praise for coming to his home to grieve for Hisashi. Izuku remained still for a few minutes without any disturbances, and then he sprang down. He suddenly stopped himself just above the earth, showing no signs of being enticed to fall to his death. Nomori Kayama, wearing civilian clothes, remarked, "You know, we could have taken the stairs." She was accompanying Izuku when he visited one of the hospital's insane patients. Why wouldn't she? Reading his notes, she discovered that Rei was the only one who had any recollections of having a mother figure. This was what he needed. In addition, she discovered him reading half a dozen books while leaning at the foot of her bed when she woke up. He reportedly woke up from a nightmare, but he would not elaborate. Yes, he was in dire need of this. Nomori and Izuku strolled to the front desk through the hospital lobby. Izuku's heart was racing, but his face was expressionless. After all this time, he was finally going to visit Rei. That's just what he fears. The hospital room of Rei the Green Devil era had a significant impact. People were unable to simply accept his death and move on. Many psychiatric patients regressed as a result of the startling fear and panic he incited. Years of advancement were reversed. Some even had to wear straitjackets. In addition, there are a ton of new patients to attend to. Rei Todoroki, however, had regressed the least out of all these mentally damaged beings. The Ice Woman was depressed and feeling empty. She hardly spoke to anyone for days, and her eyes had an empty appearance. She rarely ate unless asked to, and occasionally she would spend hours staring at the ceiling or out the window instead of sleeping. "Zu," was all she would answer when the doctors asked her what was wrong. She thought of him all the time. Since he vanished after Teleki hurt her, she had been missing and worried about him for months. He was already hurt and abandoned on the day she discovered him. The thought of what might have happened to him made her tremble. She simply knew her other children were safe, not that she didn't care about them. Endeavor ensured their safety in his agency, if he is half the heroic figure he says he is. Zu, however, lacked such defense. He had no family at all. In actuality, he needed to be protected because of his family. And her thoughts turned to the worse when the situation became so bad that residents had to be placed in shelters. She thought Zu was dead. It was reminiscent of Toya. Her mind was broken by that loss. She doesn't think she can get better in the case of another. Knock when her door was opened and the nurse entered. Rei remained motionless. "A guest? Rei, you've got a visitor. Most likely Natsuo or Fuyumi, though she hasn't seen him since she burned him, maybe even Shoto." As she gently moved her drooping eyes to the door, these ideas did not energize her. A recognizable voice said, "Hi. Rei." At that moment, Rei thought her heart had stopped beating. At breakneck speed, she turned her head. When she noticed who was standing in her doorway, her eyes widened and became bright again. Those emerald green eyes, freckles, some fresh scars, and green and black hair. Too preoccupied with hoping to herself that this was not a dream, she didn't even hear his slow footsteps as he entered her room. Izuku was more anxious than he had anticipated, and Rei's shocked expression made matters worse. He stared down at his feet and balled his hands into fists at his sides. Izuku started to say, there's a lot I want to," but was interrupted by a body crashing into him. Rei moved from sitting on the bed to nearly embracing Izuku in a tight embrace in a split second. It was the only way she could be sure he was actually there, so she did it. She sobbed into his shoulder after realizing it was genuine when she felt his warmth. Fearing that she would lose Izuku again if she let him go, the woman let out choking cries and squeezed him closer. Izuku extended his arms slowly to round her back. He shed one tear of his own. Nomori closed the door and remarked, "Let's give them some time. Fortunately, she went unnoticed by Rei or Izuku. But the nurse had a difficult question that needed to be addressed. She questioned the woman with the purple hair. Was that Midoriya's son? Midnight gave her cheek a scratch. There's a lot to unpack, and I can only share so much. After a short while Rei was still sobbing and clinging to Izuku. When she finally withdrew, Izuku saw tears saturating her cheeks. It was devastating. After saying his fictitious name, she stumbled a little and reminded Izuku of his purpose. Zizu. I've been so worried. Rei noticed the innumerable scars covering Izuku's hand and fingers as she raised a hand to wipe the tears from her left eye. She saw that the condition of his other hand was the same. The sight of the boy's injuries frightened her, and she felt compelled to take his hands and examine them for herself. She detected something metallic under his sleeves, and they were more crooked and rough than any other pair of hands she had ever felt. Izuku drew them away and displayed his inhibitory gauntlets to her. He perplexed Rei by saying, "These were made because my quirk is too strong." He told her that he had been teased for being weak back then. When a green flame emerged in his right hand, her bewilderment gave way to shock. "Rei, we need to talk." A few minutes later, Izuku gave a detailed explanation. The whole truth, and only the truth. Nothing ambiguous, simply straightforward. His peculiarity, his origins, his family's identities, and how he got to be known as the Green Devil. Why it was his fault that she got hurt. As he told her the story of his life, including its end, Rei remained utterly silent. "And now, I'm living at UA in some kind of rehabilitation program. It's finished." Izuku couldn't bear to look at Rei's face, so he told her everything. It was the realization of his nightmare. What sane person wouldn't despise him after he told her everything, all the lives he took, all the havoc he caused? "For what it's worth," Izuku said as he got to his feet and faced the door. He let out a single tear as he walked, saying, "I'm sorry for everything." He was crying, but he had no idea why. He had been anticipating this and was aware of how it would turn out. It was reasonable as Rei would never want to see him again, save in contrast to his previous mother. A pair of hands grabbed his wrist and halted him before he could get to the door. He turned to see Rei looking down, her hair pulled back from her eyes. She perplexed Izuku by asking, "How is it there?" She asked again, startled by his surprised stillness. At the end, Rei's voice faltered and new tears trickled past her trembling lips and down her cheeks. "UA, are they treating you well? Not screaming at you, not threatening you, and not hurting you?" Rei's tear-filled eyes met Izuku's, and Izuku's heart tightened. "Izuku." Rei said his given name for the first time, and Izuku was surprised by how good it felt. Before you came, I was alone and miserable. I wasn't well enough to see my kids. But when I met you, things got so much better. And when you left. At some point, I thought you died. It killed me inside, the thought of Elle losing another son. At that, the greenette's eyes started to well up with tears, but Rei wasn't finished yet. "I don't hate you. How could I for terrible things you never wanted to do? Why you reached your breakdown, why you did things you can't move on from. I am the last person who could hate you for that. Just please, don't leave me again." Izuku could not think of anything to say. She had just been under a lot of stress because he had just admitted to being the mass murderer. But even so, Rei's only concern was, if he was somewhere better than the place that made him a monster. Her first worry was for his well-being. Izuku threw his arms around her, buried his head in the bend of her neck and sobbing into her shoulder in an emotional reaction. He had not sobbed so much in a long time. "I won't. I promise. I'm sorry." They needed to talk about something more upbeat after crying and cuddling for a few minutes. Izuku listed all of the advantages he could think of. "My time in prison wasn't nearly as bad as middle school," he said. "Even though he's still getting used to everything, his life has significantly improved because to the heroes taking care of him and his education." Hearing that made Rei very happy. The two of them were smiling for the first time in a long time. After a while, their individual loads became less heavy, and they became aware of how exhausted they really were. They had experienced similar sleep deprivation. Luckily, a bed was available. Knock, the nurse returned to the room and inquired, "Rei?" Namori, who was intently following the nurse, said, "Izuku." The first thing the two of them saw made them both speechless. Rei and Izuku are sound sleeping in her bed. With one arm draped over Izuku's belly and the other beneath his neck, the white-haired woman hugged him close to her while holding his soft, fluffy hair in her palm. Izuku was around Rei's waist and back with both arms. They appeared to be really content. Midnight should have noticed that his jacket was off, revealing his inhibitor gauntlets and the scars on his arms. The scene was so sweet that all she could do was smile and wipe the tears from her eyes. She and the nurse agreed to extend their stay. Mirko said, and he's missed curfew. The house-sized dorm room was empty but for her. Lady Nagant was told of her responsibilities as a teacher, and Hawks was with her to prevent her from killing Snipe. Mount Lady was out helping a construction crew move heavy objects by using her peculiarity. The Urarakas, perhaps. Izuku was scheduled to be picked up by midnight, but she was running late. Before jumping out of the building, Mirko stretched and said, "Ah well, I was getting bored anyway." Since wearing her hero attire would draw undesired attention, she made the decision not to go. Instead of a hero convention, she was heading to a psychiatric hospital ward. The purple-haired woman seemed a little concerned when she contacted Midnight on the way. And that's what caused a nurse and two professionals to stare at Izuku and Rei sharing a bed. Mirko deadpanned, "You seriously can't get them apart?" With a pout, Midnight answered, "We tried." As she walked away, the nurse added, "I'll go see if we have a crowbar." Mirko gave a headshake. This is all because Midnight lacked the courage to separate Izuku from his mother figure. As she extended a hand to take Izuku's shoulder, Mirko thought, "You're so weak." But the moment she confronted the child directly. Whoosh. Uck. Mirko drew her palm back before the green flames consumed it. She attempted again, but before she could even make contact, the flames surged. "Seriously," she said. She tried to grasp him and wake him up again, but this time she was unsuccessful. Mirko eventually angered Izuku to the point where his flames persisted. The temperature in the room rose dangerously high. Mirko yelled, "Goddammit! Get the fire extinguisher." Rei peeked her eyes open and moaned at the growing heat before the place could burn down. Without even flinching, she pushed her hand into the emerald flame. Izuku opened his eyes as her frost-covered palm hissed out the fire on his back. Rei's smile was the first thing he noticed. Izuku turned to see the shocked expressions on the faces of Midnight and Mirko as Rei said, "Your guardians are here. We put up a fierce battle to stop him, but Ice Queen here does it with a single swipe." Mirko thought in disbelief. Izuku, who was already missing Rei, stretched as he got out of bed. In the same way, she missed Izuku's affection. As the nurse returned to the room and observed the brunette and white-haired woman finally parting ways, she stated, "Okay, I got the crowbar. Oh, never mind." After saying farewell to Rei, Mirko and Midnight decided it was time to take Izuku back to UA. Izuku silently re-put on his jacket and went after them. Rei put her arms across his chest and her forehead on his shoulder, giving him a back hug before they even made it to the door. Izuku put his hands on her forearms and sank into the sensation. "I begged, come back, okay? I will, I promise. I'll never abandon you again." Rei let go of Izuku and left the room after crying a couple more times. He said a few final things before he turned the corner. He smiled slightly as he glanced back over his shoulder at her. "Bye, Mom." Rei's jaw opened slightly and her eyes grew wide. With a slight wave, Izuku departed, and the white-haired mother sat on her bed, his words echoing in her mind. Outside the medical facility, "Never woulda thought the big bad devil would be a mama's boy in the end," Mirko laughed. Midnight exclaimed, "You called her Mom, it was adorable." Izuku simply kept a few paces ahead of them, paying them hardly no attention. But Midnight and Mirko knew he was grinning, and this was of little use. In the meantime, Rei clutched her bosom and sobbed happy tears as she told herself, "He called me Mom." The nurse remarked, "I heard, and I'm glad your visitor got you to cheer up. I think it did wonders for him as well." Rei repeated, "He called me Mom, I heard. So I was talking to his caretaker, teacher, we discussed a visiting schedule if today went well." Rei repeated, "He called me Mom." This led the nurse to examine her closely. "Rei?" she inquired. But Rei remained utterly inattentive to the outside world and simply repeated those words, "Oh no." A distraught hero called out on Hawk's phone, "Hawks, rioters in the Muga district are rioting, we could use your help." "Sorry, I've still got my task at UA, you'll have to handle it. I'll send in my sidekicks to lend a hand." "That'll do. Whatever you're doing at the top hero school must be important if you can't leave for an attack." Hawks's eyes narrowed with unusual gravity. The wing hero ended the conversation and walked away, saying, "Trust me, it is. I'm only part of it. The future of Japan, maybe even the world, hinges on what I and the UA staff are doing here." To the kitchen, where everyone's breakfast was being prepared by the self-appointed chef. "A few minutes of reading a cookbook, and now you're Gordon Ramsay," Hawks said. He cracked some eggs into a frying pan and cooked them over high, green heat, but the chef ignored him. Izuku questioned, "What happened to the world hinged on you?" Pointing to the trash bag containing Izuku's initial breakfast attempts, Hawks said, "The world is depending on me to keep that out of anyone's stomachs." After studying from 4 to 4:40 in the morning, the greenette left his room at 5 in the morning. He decided to prepare breakfast for himself after getting hungry. Things didn't go well. Luckily, his housemates slept through his attempts at amateur cooking. Only because it happened as Hawks was leaving his nest had he heard it. Before he set fire to their dorm, he advised Izuku to study a few meals from a cookbook. Izuku accomplished that far more quickly than Hawks had anticipated. After just a few minutes of studying a new subject, he went from making barely edible dishes to restaurant-quality dinners. Even though the other residents were hesitant to sample his meal, they were captivated by his cooking after only one bite. Mirko pretended that this was how Izuku would cover his rent. "He looks like a lovely house husband with his apron," Midnight exclaimed. At both, he rolled his eyes. Izuku dressed and prepared to leave after breakfast. By saying, "You're not visiting Rei," Midnight interrupted him. Izuku paused at the door, his face unpleasant. "The majority of people had other things to do. Sorry, but you have your assessment test today. No leaving the house until that's done." Nagant and Midnight met with the teachers. Mirko was on patrol. Hawks and Mount Lady were left to keep an eye on Izuku. "Okay." Yu clicked her tongue while using Izuku's laptop to access a website that evaluates a person's IQ. Hawks, meantime, grabbed his phone and took out any textbooks that contained material that could be of value. He couldn't be caught cheating. Whatever score you get out of 100 will determine what level you're on. "We'll check back in an hour. Remember what Midnight said, no leaving until you're done, got it?" Izuku sat down at his desk and remarked, "Fine." While they were doing the dishes, the two blondes left him alone with his gadget. Mount Lady inquired, "So, how do you think he'll do?" Hawks appeared unconcerned. "I'm sure he'll do fine. I heard from Tsukachi that Izuku was in the top 5 of his academics. And these last 2 days, he's had time to catch up on stuff he missed." 2 days to catch up on over years' worth of work. What could go wrong? Yu was deadpanned. Hawks laughed. "Yeah, that would be true for anyone else. But Izuku's really something else. He throws surprises out like it's nothing, and he grows a lot faster, too." Mount Lady and Hawks were lounging on the couch since they had nothing else to do around the house. The wing hero was changing TV channels, and the giant hero was scrolling through Hero Book. So bored." Hawks moaned as he collapsed on the cushions of the couch. Who would have thought securing the world would get so dull? Yu gave a tongue click. "I don't know if I'd go that far. It's more like we're babysitting the world's most destructive kid." Hawks released a raspberry. Hawks shrugged and got up from the couch. "Izuku started his test about 40 minutes ago. Want to check on him?" Hawks asked. "Meh. Beats sitting around being old. You're 21. The room of Izuku when Mount Lady and Hawks arrived. They anticipated seeing Izuku deeply focused on his assessment, his eyes fixed on the screen of his laptop. However, reality does not match expectations. Actually, Izuku was focused on writing what seemed like a letter next to 2 finished counterparts, so he turned his laptop away from himself. His hand was moving so quickly. It was well-written Japanese on paper, but anyone who saw how quickly his hand was moving would think he was scribbling. Izuku said, "Hi guys," without raising his head from his desk. Hawks inquired, "What are you up to?" He smiled slightly and added, "Writing to Rei. She asked me to stay in touch. She doesn't have a phone, so I can't text her." Izuku rarely grinned unless someone was talking about Rei. Mount Lady inquired, "What about your test?" He stated casually, "I submitted it. The results are pending now. I checked and double-checked my answers. It's been pending for a couple minutes now." The laptop was taken up by Mount Lady. The responses were still being assessed, as Izuku had stated. She inquired, "How long have you been finished?" Hawks and Mount Lady gave him a startled look as he said, 10 minutes or so. He completed the test without missing a single question, and in half the time that a typical person would. In 10 minutes, he composed 3 complete letters. There was only one thought that Yu and Keigo had in common. "What is he?" Ding! When Mount Lady finished evaluating Izuku's work, his laptop chimed in her hands. Izuku just folded his letters for Rei and placed them in their respective envelopes while Hawks peered over her shoulder. To see Izuku's score, the blonde girl only needed to scroll down. She inhaled deeply before acting. "Listen Izuku, you've been out of school for a while, and you did your best. So don't feel bad that you only got 84 100ths. "Holy crap," said Hawks. They gazed back at Izuku after their eyes widened. Their raucous responses did not even faze him. With a neutral look, He just clutched the 3 letters he had written before. Either of you mind taking me to the post office? Yu Takayama, Mount Lady repeated, what are you? As he and his spy walked out of the post office, Izuku rolled his eyes. Even in civilian clothes, Hawk's enormous red wings would have attracted too much attention. Thus, Mount Lady was left to take care of him for a while. We just had breakfast, Izuku retorted. Yeah, a whole hour ago. Yu fired back. Hey, how about we get a snack? There's a good restaurant around here that got done remodeling. You glutton. Izuku thought, but followed anyhow. The two of them sat at a booth, Izuku looking through his phone, receiving messages from Hawks and Mirko, respectively, while Mount Lady browsed the sweet side of the menu. Hawks. I want to fly. I'm going crazy from spending all day in this birdcage. Mirko. Battle me. Izuku claims that as he read that, he could hear Mirko cracking her knuckles. He has the rest of the day free, so he could schedule time for both. He might benefit from a sparring session because he doesn't want to be too rusty when the school year begins, and perhaps flying through the air would help him decompress. Having animal companions is beneficial. As he handed Yu a box to take away, the waiter stated, Your order, miss. Thank you. She stated. Izuku was about to walk away when he noticed a familiar head of brown hair in a bob cut. Too many people were in front of her, but Izuku hardly noticed them and froze when he realized who he was staring at. Uraraka. A break at last. Construction companies like theirs have been in high demand ever since the Green Devil was executed. Occasionally, they received help from Mount Lady, which was helpful, but the workload was still insane. Sure, they had money, which is a nice turnaround, but it's been longer than they'd like since they've had family time. Ochako couldn't tell what was worse, her parents looking depressed or exhausted and bone dry. Mr. Uraraka sighed as he slumped down in the booth his family sat down at. When the waiter arrived at their seat, the Urarakas became excited, but oddly, he had a tray to set. All right, that's 3 cups of ginseng tea, and a plate of mochi for the young lady, he said. As he arranged the steaming teacups and Ochako's favorite snack, he remarked, Enjoy, everyone. Excuse me, we didn't order this, Mr. Uraraka said, raising his hand. The server grinned and said, It's on the house. We haven't even looked at the menu yet. For that, you can thank the young man with the black and green hair over there. I know that messy hair. But, Zu has black and white hair. Is that really the same guy? Ochako almost exclaimed as the waiter threw his thumb over his shoulder toward the restaurant's exit, and the entire family followed, the father and daughter more eager than the mother. Do you want to share anything with us, Ochako? Mrs. Uraraka said with a sly smirk. Her daughter had been staring at the exit longer than her parents, and her eyes lit up slightly when she saw them. Ochako looked back to see her mother's playful expression and her father's less than amused face. Seems like someone has a hidden admirer. It's not as you believe, she said that right away, her cheeks turning red instead of pink. He knew your favorite snack and paid for it, even got us tea. With his head buried in his hands and his face concealed, Mr. Uraraka mumbled, I can't believe this. My daughter is chatting to a boy behind my back. He is even aware of her preferences. What about teddy bears and flowers next? No. Not at all. Ochako's tirade. Izuku, meanwhile, had the tiniest smile on his face as he walked away with Yu. Hawks said, It's been way too long since we flew free together. He and Izuku were in the air, their wings lifting them well above the grounds of the University of Arizona. As long as they remained inside the expansive university boundaries, everything was okay. Izuku stated bluntly, The only other time was when you were chasing me and I nearly incinerated you. Hawks dismissed the subject before it could ruin the moment. So, got any goals? Hawks looked at Izuku's wings and they're not far from the usual size he maintained, but they've been bigger. Hawks wanted to race the youngster, but Hawks would easily win with those inhibitor gauntlets. Izuku gave him a curious sidelong glance as the bird spoke up. It's not like I'll be here long enough to see any meaningful goals through. Hawks scowled. I don't know why you'd ask me that, Izuku said, looking ahead. It's not like I'll be here long enough to see any meaningful goals through. Of course it wouldn't be that easy. Izuku's pessimism couldn't be blamed for it, and it got drastically worse up until recently. Come on, there's gotta be something you want to see through besides killing all for one, Hawks said, his easy smile returning, but it could be pushed away, slowly if necessary. Have fun, let's suppose, theoretically, in around 10 years, you're a free man. As free as possible, that is. After all of this, you would probably be prepared to retire before you ever found employment. What I want to know is, with whom do you envision yourself getting married? Izuku was totally unprepared for that question. He showed no signs of being shaken, only slightly widened eyes, and Hawks only needed his lack of reaction or rejection of the idea to know that he had considered it or didn't entirely believe it was impossible. He chose to tease, saying, "Oh, I see. There are too many alternatives to choose just one, huh? I apologize for asking, Lady Killer," he laughed. Whoosh. Whoa. Izuku let out a loud groan of frustration as Hawks barely escaped a wave of flames that was headed straight at him. He may have pushed a bit more than was necessary, but it was worth it to him. If it will make you stop talking, then I'll confess that I've considered living a tranquil existence. A family in which some mistakes would never be made again. Izuku sneered, "Don't bother, it's not like it'll happen." Hawks grinned, "Don't worry, your secret's safe with me. I read your journal, dude." Izuku's eyebrows hardened into a fury. "I literally have a whole list of girls who probably have something for you," she said. "They have no idea what my name is. I have only spent a small portion of my life with them. They have no idea who I am." Izuku tightened his fist and said, "I'm over this useless conversation." Hawks felt a deep ache in his chest. Pointless was Izuku's attitude about dreams, particularly his own. It was the precise thing that kept him going through difficult years that would have crushed others. For a time, they were silent, only the wind in their ears. "What brought you to see her?" Izuku piped up, grabbing Hawks' attention. "Nagant. Although I am aware that she was your superior, she is not at fault for the death of the previous chairman of the Safety Commission. Why did you choose her?" "Nice question," Hawks said, scratching the back of his head. "I made the decision to go see her around a year after she was imprisoned. I wanted to hear her side of the story out of curiosity, and what she had been thinking about ever since. She was just as frigid as I had anticipated or roughly as cold as you. I knew she still had a heroic heart, though, even if she didn't believe it. Yes, she did kill someone, but it was because she wished for a better society in which people were more aware of their faults. She could have done things a bit better, in my opinion." Izuku refused to let Hawks see the gleam in his eyes as he peered down over the school they were flying over. "Kana," he thought, "sometimes I wonder what my replacement is like. I find it fascinating that she is a bright scientist's daughter who is eccentric. She is with the Yagi family, nevertheless. I'm not at all interested in watching them spoil a kid to make up for their abandonment of me." He snarled at the last line. "He's opening up more, but still pretty pessimistic. At least we're on a good path. I can't wait to see him interact with his classmates." Hawks thought, ups and downs, but progress. The two boys flew until they reached the main UA building, and they tried to perch on the roof. At that moment, a brown and white blur arrived directly at Izuku. "I thought you were patrolling?" the youngster said, raising his leg to meet another powerful one and putting up his hand to catch a blow. Izuku inquired, "Mama's boy, you barely did anything, now attack me." Izuku let Mirko to fall, and his gaze hardened into a chilly scowl. "UAAASSSSSs." As she fell, she screamed, "Gamma Jim." Izuku was well aware that Mirko was a strange woman, almost insane, and that most people, even heroes, would want him dead or want to avoid him in order to avoid his wrath. However, here she was, begging to spar with him. "Is that all you're capable of? Flash fire techniques are off the table because they require more firepower than he can put out, and there's something else." Mirko taunted as he rushed in for a roundhouse kick, which Izuku barely avoided. She was a melee fighter against a flame quirk user, which should have put her at a disadvantage, but Izuku had his inhibitor gauntlets on, which gives him a tiny fraction of his full power, and his flames don't reach far. The rabbit hero was no joke. Mirko rushed in for a punch, noticing that he was distracted, and slapped him right across the face. Izuku flinched, but it wasn't enough because Mirko jumped up and he was hit with a knee to the chin. Before Izuku could be thrown flying, his leg was grabbed, and he was thrown back to the ground. There was a heavy thud, followed by a wave of dust from the impact, and Izuku coughed out the air that had been knocked out of him. Mirko couldn't help but feel angry and let down. Izuku shouldn't be that simple to defeat, even if he had a serious disability. His quirk is adaptable, creative, and capable of more. He's simply not trying. What gives, devil? What? You act as though this is your first altercation. Because I'm a lady or whatever, are you holding back? That couldn't be further from the truth, Izuku said with a grimace as he stood up. Then what? Izuku was so engrossed in his thoughts that he failed to notice a rabbit foot with his name was headed for his stomach. He gazed directly into her eyes, her blood-red eyes, her crazy grin as she attacked, and the fact that she had the same eyes as him. As the blow knocked Izuku off his feet once more, he grunted and said, "Listen, kid, You need to get over whatever mountain of problems you have. I'm saying to conquer, not to forgive and forget. I'm not a teacher, but here's something I hold close and dear. Don't hold anything back. She explained as Izuku gave her a startled look. You don't want to be dying and regretting not doing more, do you? Well, unless you stop allowing something that isn't even existing to dominate your life, that's what will happen, whether it happens now or much later. Fight me now, Izuku. As she leapt from her position and prepared an axe kick, Mirko finished, looking down at the young man who was rapidly coming, his hair covering his eyes. The rabbit hero thought, perhaps a dislocated shoulder will reach him, but as she was ready to hit him, her foot struck a burst of smoke. Huh? Mirko cried out in bewilderment, and then she heard a blast hit her back and heard the sound of combustion in her ears. She grunted as smoke billowed from her white leotard. You're urging the man who can level cities to engage in full-scale combat? Izuku asked with smoke and popping sounds coming from his palms. Mirko stared at his hands as they emitted miniature green explosions. You're mad. Mirko smiled broadly. You say that, but look who smiled at last. It was true. Izuku had a smile on his face, though it was much smaller than Mirko's or Bakugo's. He had picked up the smile from these fighting madmen. Izuku threw his hands behind him and said, I guess we're both nuts. He threw himself into the air with two powerful blasts and then let out another to charge at the rabbit hero. You're chock full of hatred, huh? There's nothing like a good spar to get all that shit out of ya. Mirko responded by flexing her thighs and jumping up to him, preparing her leg to meet his rapid right hook. May I even inquire? When Nomori returned home, she discovered Mirko cramming her face with beef curry and carrot strips, while Izuku stood at the stove with several pots cooking and wearing an apron. More significantly, both of them were bruised and bandaged. Without raising his gaze from his cooking, Izuku stated, according to Recovery Girl, we need to know when to toe the line when we spar. You were correct about one thing, midnight. Mirko started when she had finished her meal. He would make a fantastic house husband. Izuku did not respond verbally in a dignified manner. Izuku finished serving the food to the others, but he didn't touch it until Nagant entered the room, looking pretty pissed off. Izuku asked her what was wrong before he ate, and Nagant sighed, realizing that there was no use in trying to hide anything from him. Your dad was asking about you, she said bluntly. The office of Nezu, previous, in order to facilitate a meeting between the two newest members of the UA faculty. Nezu had invited Toshinori and Kana to his office without either of them knowing the other was coming. However, All Might arrived first, allowing Kana to overhear some of his remarks to Nezu, which went something like, I think it would be best for Izuku to spend time at home with his family. Nagant entered, and even with Nezu's politeness, the atmosphere was thick. Lady Nagant. Toshinori started, All Might. Kana was perplexed. She had seen the giant of a man known as All Might, but to think that the thin, small man in front of her was him? She wouldn't believe it if she hadn't heard Nezu speak his name. You're much smaller than I had anticipated. Toshinori felt a little uncomfortable, but dismissed it. What you said was heard by me. It's interesting that you feel compelled to accept responsibility only after your child has nearly destroyed society. She understands. I suppose it makes sense because she was confined with him in a little cell. Toshinori inhaled. His mother and I both committed mistakes. We must make amends to him. Nezu intervened, saying, I know how you feel, All Might, but that's just too soon. He needs more time to acclimate before opening such a wound. But even if Izuku has calmed down a little, there's no guarantee he'll give you the time of day. In fact, even if you don't want that, his total disregard for you might be the best you could hope for. You'll have plenty of opportunities to talk throughout the school year. We must make up for lost time, sir. He is still welcome to reside in the dorms, but in the meantime, please allow him to return to us. For what purpose? Another excuse to burn everything that comes into view. You obviously don't know what living in your house did to him, because you wouldn't even consider having him return for even a day. Nagant spat, unable to control herself any longer. He was correct. You're quite keen to put the past behind you. With all due respect, Lady Nagant, that's not your bus, Toshinori said, hardening his gaze. Ka-chunk. Toshinori halted when he saw his coworker glaring at him and pointing a rifle barrel straight at his face. You're right, that isn't my business, he said. However, my job is to ensure that the children I will be raising have the opportunity to grow up to be true heroes rather than hypocrites with inflated egos. Toshinori sensed that she wasn't just criticizing him. You two are dismissed, Nezu said, lifting his paw. Nagant withdrew her sniper arm and strode by Toshinori with a murderous gleam in her eyes. You're going to be colleagues soon, so I'd rather you didn't try to maim each other, she said as she arrived at the door. I find you repulsive. You all make me feel nauseous, including your family. In addition to being the epitome of the horrible aspects of hero culture, you are also responsible for the child's outcome. I won't murder you, though. To deny him that would be unfair of me. With that, he left all Maya no, Toshinori Yajiya even more dejected. Now but enough about Kana, what about Izuku? The child had his fists clenched at his sides, his eyes clouded, and if her story about meeting Izuku's stepdad was any indication, she prayed she wouldn't be meeting the rest of his family. He snarled, Mirko. As his head slowly turned to face the long-eared heroine over his shoulder, she was startled by his terrifying glare, and the sight of his livid eyes alight with the fire of his quirk was enough to give anyone a deathly chill. His words caused her to feel something different from the excitement she had anticipated. The second round. Gamma Gym. Although Nagant, Midnight, Mount Lady, Hawks, Aizawa, Recovery Girl, and Nezu were waiting in case, Mirko insisted that they simply wait outside. I won't kick his ass too hard. Not very comforting, but she shut the door before they could argue. Izuku, wearing his blue and white gym uniform once more, entered the spacious training area first, followed shortly after by Mirko. They lasted for 5 minutes before they finally stopped, and when they opened the door, it appeared as though a nuke had been dropped in the gym. Smoke filled the air, soot covered the floor and walls, green flames illuminated various areas, and Mirko was still standing in the middle, but appeared unsteady. 5 seconds later, they heard explosions, roaring flames, grunts, and yells, mostly from Mirko, coming from the opposite side. After spitting out some blood and moving toward the exit with his uniform mostly burned off, Izuku approached Nezu first, looking him in the dark eyes and saying, I will burn this country down before I spend another minute living with those bastards. Kana was the last person he saw before returning to the dorm, and he gave her a brief, thank you, before heading out. As this was going on, Recovery Girl was healing Mirko for the second time. Remind me, how much of his quirk can he use? Nezu replied, 10%, to the rabbit heroine's question, bullshit. The mighty tower, once a heavily secured sanctuary for civilian evacuees during the Green Devil's rampage, the skyscraper agency of the former #1 hero has effectively been transformed into a new home for the Yagi family since the man in command has formally retired from the hero scene. Their American housemate, who is blonde, was working in her room, which was equipped with a big computer to create her designs. Melissa pushed herself from her desk to her bed and adjusted her glasses. She checked the time and discovered that it had been 5 hours since she left her room. She was passionate about her work, but she had never gone that long without interacting with people or taking a break. Her isolation was partly her own choice and partly the result of her host family's decision. Izumi and Kachan aren't much better. They spend a lot of time training and studying, the latter half of which she offered to help with, but they yell at her when she starts muttering. Aunt Inko and Uncle Toshi were so protective of her that it was suffocating, and she didn't understand why, try as she might. The Green Devil is gone, society is being rebuilt, and she has repeatedly stated that she is capable of taking care of herself, but she is hardly permitted to do anything on her own, not even allowed to cook for herself. At least UA is coming up in a month, so she told herself she was excited because she, Bakugo, and Izumi could start their dream careers as heroes and gear specialists. However, to be honest, she's more excited about moving into the dorms. Occasionally, she hears them muttering something about a Deku. Was it a person, or was it a term they used to disparagingly refer to her? She hoped it wasn't the latter. Inko and Toshi treat Melissa like a helpless child who came home badly hurt one day, traumatized by that image, and Izumi and Katsuki turn her away as if she were a painful reminder of someone or something else that they don't want to face yet. While it may sound strange, Melissa doesn't feel like the Yagis and Bakugo see her. The way they act, it's like it's for someone else. The Hospital of Rei. With a pleasant smile, the white-haired woman read 4 letters, the first 3 from Izuku. One about his adjustment to living with others again and his new hobby of cooking. Another about his conflicted feelings about attending UA as a student, to which she replied that he need not be afraid because he has people who can help ensure that what happened in middle school doesn't happen again, and the 4th about how living in Tartarus was, stating that it was one of his high points in comparison to the rest of his past. She first pondered whether Hawk's feathers were ever used to write like a quill before reading the 4th letter, which was from Hawks, Midnight, and Mount Lady rather than Izuku. To Rei Todoroki, what the devil is your child? He's incredibly intelligent for someone who hasn't attended school for over a year. Mount Lady Izuku picks things up quickly, and I know this from personal experience. Hawks, your son is incredible. Rei. He made a high school assessment test seem like a simple examination, and I have no doubt that he will perform admirably on his entrance exam. At midnight, he and Shoto will be in the same grade. I'm proud of them both, but how will they get along? I haven't seen or heard from Shoto since I snapped and hurt him. He probably hates me, not that I blame him. In any case, I hope they can at least come to an understanding. Rei was a little less than thrilled than she should have been, as she had hoped and prayed for this to happen, for Izuku to finally have a decent school life. Knock Namori had told her in advance that Izuku and another were coming to visit, and such news always made her smile, so Rei set the letters on her table and hurried to the door. Until she saw the gloomy faces of her son, and his companion with the pink and purple hair. "Hi Mom." Izuku muttered softly, avoiding eye contact with Rei, and the frost user immediately invited them inside her chamber. Rei stroked Izuku's hair and said, "I see." He and Kana had just finished telling her about the newly opened wounds, and for the sake of openness, Izuku had no regrets about losing his temper when Toshinori was mentioned. He had every right to be angry with the man. He simply needed some Rei time to calm down, and Kana followed suit. "That man has no authority over you. He is not your father." Unfortunately, visiting hours ended, and Izuku and Rei hugged goodbye before the former left, feeling lighter. "From what you told me, he still doesn't know how terrible an effect he has on you." Rei didn't want to bring it up, but she shuddered to think how Izuku's sister and the two other blondes are. Something gripping the back of her collar stopped Kana from following, and when she turned around, she saw Rei holding her in place with a mother's gaze on her face and a hint of fierceness in her eyes. "Take care of him for me," she said. "Please," she said. Rei went back to her bed and sat down since she had something to think about. Kana turned and faced her fully. "I promise you I will," she said, not merely out of a sense of obligation as a teacher. "Take care, ma'am." She waved briefly before leaving. "I hope the other teachers will prevent his stepfather from pushing him, but what about his mother? She might be just as bad, if not worse, of a trigger for him. What hope does she have if Yagi hasn't learned anything?" The UA2 days had passed since Izuku received the news about his father and beat the living daylights out of Mirko to vent his resentment. He had hardly spoken since and had spent the next few hours studying in his room, where he would have remained if it weren't for a bird on his balcony. Izuku was sitting quietly at his desk, preparing for his entrance exam to the hero course. "First, it's my room," Hawks replied as he entered through the sliding glass door. "I thought I'd find you here. Secondly, you had the option to use the door. Additionally, you might benefit from a little vacation. Take a seat comfortably and let's go." Izuku looked up from his study materials and said, "I can't let people see my quirk. We're heading to my agency, and I have a decent gym there." "Who mentioned allowing others to view you?" "Don't worry about getting lost, we're going straight from here." Hawks and Izuku took off, flying over the clouds. Izuku, who usually wouldn't dress so light, opted for a black tank top and baggy black shorts with a vertical white stripe on his left leg because it was a warm day and Hawks was taking him somewhere they would get a private workout. From their altitude, the people below looked like tiny little ants, and to those below, they could have been ordinary birds. Izuku saw that his fire wings were bigger than the previous time they flew when Hawks called to him. "Welcome to my agency, kid." Hawks swooped down, and Izuku followed. They landed on the roof of a tall structure. Izuku deadpanned, "You lied to me." Hawks informed him that the workout would be private and that there was no possibility of encountering civilians on his agency's top gym level, so you can understand his astonishment and mild dismay when he discovered Mirko had just finished her warm-up. Hawks simply shrugged. Mirko smiled at him as usual before Izuku had a chance to turn back. "I'm surprised he didn't have to abduct you to get you out of your room. So, are you going to work out or just keep staring at a buff, sweaty gal?" she asked, laughing, although Izuku understood it wasn't malicious. But he wasn't easy either. Izuku was already fairly toned and well-developed physically, but what made his body more eye-catcher, and eye-candy, depending on who you asked, were the numerous scars that covered him. Jagged scars across his shins, thighs, arms, face, and especially his palms and fingers. Despite his better judgment, Izuku stayed, and Mirko only just realized how light he dressed. Because of her earlier teasing, Mirko was the one who occasionally stared at him while he worked out. After more time than she had anticipated, he began to perspire, which made it worse. His sweaty, scary, muscular physique was a continual distraction, and she had never been happier with a distraction. His skin's natural fluids shone in a unique way. Izuku had only failed to call out Mirko for staring at him because he misinterpreted the look, and she turned away before he could say, "She's still mad at me." He sighed to himself, realizing that Mirko was one of the reasons he had been sequestered in his room for the past 2 days. Feeling guilty about the way their last spar went or the way he fought with wrath and malice. venting his anger against someone who had done him nothing. The aspect of it that most disgusted him was that his family was with him. Oh, and Hawks was on the pull-up bar between the two, utterly forgotten and overcome by discomfort. When Mirko departed for the showers, the wing hero felt as like he could finally breathe. Dude, just say something. I know you're not feeling great because you flipped out on her, but she's the number 5 hero, he moaned, causing Izuku to set down the 13 kilograms dumbbells he was curling. Additionally, she sort of offered to spar with you, so you're not at all like your family. Izuku simply cleaned himself off with his sweat rag without replying. Hawks sighed, just talk to her if it really bothers you. At least then I won't have to put up with this humiliating embarrassment. I'm hitting the showers, Izuku said, rolling his eyes and turning to go. Mirko was finishing her lukewarm shower, lukewarm because she really needed a cooldown, because apparently, even though he doesn't realize it, Izuku had decided to switch from being a devil of destruction to a devil of seduction. The sound of water hitting tiles and the steam that obscured her vision filled the ladies' shower. Mirko dried herself off with her towel, wrapped it around herself, and walked out of the shower. Fuck me. The route to the showers split between the gender-segregated showers, and Mirko stopped right in front of Izuku, whose torn bodies were wrapped in nothing but their towels, and who stared into each other without saying a word. Mirko thought she needed another shower because she could see Izuku's rock-hard abs, his chiseled chest, and his badass scars without any hindrance, and sweat still glazed the surface of his masculine body. Damn it, who wouldn't want to run their tongue all over him? Straight men would think twice if they saw him. As she saw the boy's eyes sidestep her and he put a hand behind his fluffy, dual-colored hair, Izuku began, jolting Mirko out of her reverie. Sorry. Our last session, after Nagant told us what Yagi said. I apologize, I went too far. Izuku's apologies was cut short as his perfect abs were struck by a fist. Now was not the moment for Mirko to remark on his robust nature. Who the heck do you think you're talking to? Huh? You think your little hissy fit was something that scared me or some shit? She yelled, surprising Izuku. Someone is so self-centered. Don't waste your time apologizing to your peers who would genuinely appreciate it. The dark-skinned woman touched his soft hair, surprising Izuku, who was speechless and doubtful he would ever understand the rabbit hero. But if it's really eaten y'all up inside, I'm happy to beat the hell out of you next time, Izuku said. Next time. Izuku grinned, albeit not very much, at that. I'll hold you to that. He then proceeded to the shower, feeling rejuvenated even before the water touched him. Izuku and Rumi aren't going to be too thrilled about this, and it means we'll essentially have to hide him in the dorms. Midnight had been reviewing the lesson plans for new students, assigning them to dorms, and coming up with a new topic that focused on the students who had already earned their provisional licenses. She needed to discuss this last topic with Izuku, whose room she was on her way to. Ha! A seductive moan interrupted Midnight's stream of thinking, and although she's heard dozens of such moans, the voice that delivered them came from Izuku's room. Deeper. How could he already have a girl in his room before classes have even started? Midnight screamed in her mind as she placed her ear to his door and listened carefully. The stoic and distant Izuku making those types of sounds. Kana, Nagant. What in the fuck? Oh, that's it. Midnight rushed into the room without thinking, but she stopped as she saw the true nature of the situation. What are you? She said. Before Midnight interrupted, Izuku was seated on the floor against his bed, and Kana was sitting on the edge of his bed with her knees on either side of him. She had her fingers buried in Izuku's soft, curly hair, and the child appeared to be very at ease. I have questions, Midnight stated. When Izuku saw that Kana had let her hair grow out to reach between her shoulder blades, it looked even better when she undid her ponytail, which he informed her about. When Kana asked how Izuku's hair was so soft and fluffy without any shampoo or conditioner, he offered to let her feel it, and it was softer than she had anticipated. It turned out that Izuku's soft spot is his hair, so Kana didn't mind massaging his scalp as long as he did the same. You two have a kink in your hair, then? Shut up, the old jailbird snarled when Midnight inquired. Aizawa, who had been training and sparring with Mirko on a regular basis for 2 weeks, said, 12 meters. Izuku held out his hands in front of him and expelled a wave of green flames from both. Even if I'm stuck with 10% for the time being, I can still compete with the other students. Izuku's maximum range was only 10 meters when he first put on the inhibitor gauntlets. That reminds me, Aizawa said, how are you going to conceal your power? A small percentage of people have green flames. Izuku lowered himself into a crouch and leapt to a height similar to Mirko, saying, I'm not just a powerhouse, I can control it, too. Izuku landed by throwing multiple punches at the air, and while there were faint sounds of combustion, there were hardly any sparks visible. I'll go with an ignition quirk, something that'll just meagerly enhance my movements, Izuku said. Then Aizawa's watch beeped, warning them both, you should head back to the dorm, your seniors are back. Izuku nodded and followed instructions. Aizawa shrugged. That'll do, I suppose. Izuku could see several hero students in their second and third years back at the teacher's dorm building. They, along with other hero students across the nation, were out on the streets trying to fill the void left by the professionals who quit. Heroes of the restoration type, like Cementos and occasionally Mount Lady, had these kids to thank for patrolling in their place, but this meant that they frequently spent their free time wandering the campus or in their dorms, so Izuku had to be cautious about how often he left his room because there were no first years around yet, so his presence alone would raise suspicions. Izuku saw the third-year students approaching and returned inside. Their dorm was the closest to the teacher's. Before he left, he noticed a specific student. A girl with long blue hair and a blue and green bodysuit. She was identified as Ryukyu's disciple. Aside from Rei, she is the only person who can recognize Izuku as the Green Devil right away because she saw his face on the day he was taken in. She's the last person I can let see me, Izuku said. Gamma Gym Ua Izuku sighed after finishing practice. He has worked to improve his hand-to-hand fighting skills and quirk control, which he acquired from Mr. Aizawa. He would appear to have a tiny heat when he touched someone, along with a mild mobility-boosting quirk. He moved his head abruptly toward the gym's entrance. Izuku sighed, used his regular flames, and soared out the window as a blue-haired person, who appeared to be seeking for someone, walked in. With no one home to answer, she called, her voice echoing off the walls, Hyolu? Anybody home? Najire Hado, also known as Najire-chan the energetic hero, was this person. She returned to school early to complete her extracurricular hero job, just like many other hero students with their provisional licenses. But Najire's curiosity is stoked by something she's been thinking about. The Green Devil. Since most people think he's dead, she can't openly discuss it, and Ryukyu doesn't want her to get into problems with someone so deadly. As the Dragoon hero put it, she is in danger just because she knows he is still alive. But when she got back to UA, Najire's interest grew. She feels as though there is someone there that she is unaware of, but she is unable to describe it. Someone who is concealing. She is referring to someone else, not Lady Nagant, the new employee. They never reveal their faces, as if they are constantly moving around the school and dorm area. She is dying of curiosity. Izuku, meantime, was sitting on the windowsill from which he had just flown. When someone is going to walk in on him, his ability to sense body warmth comes in handy. He gripped his forearm and thought, still so persistent. He sighed and slipped back to his room in the dorm. Izuku had a little stack of textbooks next to him as he sat under a tree. With pen and notebook in hand, he diligently prepared for his impending entrance exam. Being able to study outside in quiet was pleasant, but that tranquility would not last long since a blue-haired bundle of energy was prowling among the bushes in the woodland region of UA. Najire jumped out from behind a tree and cried, "Aha!" But there was nothing there. She didn't realize how accurate her statement was. "Aw man. I thought for sure you were here," she said. Izuku took care to maintain his grip on the branch without releasing any muscles. He moaned inwardly, that's another safe space crossed off the list. This led him back to Aldera, where he was constantly pursued by his bullies from the hiding spots he sought solace in. The person hunting him down isn't a spoiled shitstain or a nasty asshole, at least not right now. To deliver something, the Surge Quirk user went to the teacher's dorm. Najire handed the pieces of stapled paper to her teacher and stated, "Here's the report from Ryukyu's agency, Mr. Snipe." As he accepted the papers, the hero with a Western motif exclaimed, "Appreciate that, Hado." Hado left once he gave her the all-clear. Till she crept back in and Snipe turned his back. Najire has never gone anywhere other than the ground floor of this dorm building until today. She was naturally interested in seeing what more the teacher's home had to offer, but not enough to enter without authorization. However, she noticed something else that caught her attention. She saw textbooks for a moment through a third-story window on one of her midday flights across campus. She is fairly certain that they were textbooks used by students. How fascinating. I'm supposed to be on the third floor. Does anyone live here as a student? Is he the child of a teacher? I wonder if they are related to the first-year hero teacher. Najire was thinking, I wonder, oof, when she was bumped into. An amused voice remarked, I didn't know we had a visitor. Najire tensed. The R-rated heroine, Midnight, had spotted her peeping. In front of her, the older woman stood with assurance, her hand on her whip that was fastened to her hip. Miss Midnight said, Hi, Miss Midnight. I was just delivering something for Snipe, Midnight said, taking her whip away. And now that you've done that, you don't have anything else to do here, right? Midnight flashed a savage grin, and Najire swallowed. As a freshman, it never failed to frighten her to her core, and it was doing so now. And no, ma'am. She stammered the words. Midnight sung, lovely, while holding the handle of her whip in one hand and the end in the other, ready to give a series of forceful lashes at any time. The older woman advised, then why don't you be a good girl, and go back to your dorms, Why yes, ma'am, Najire said as she turned to leave. Her shoulders slumped in despair as Midnight saw her round a corner and head back down the stairs. She said, sorry, ma'am, and walked away. The tone of Midnight changed from to feeling sorry for the girl, whatever it was. The room of Izuku was sitting at his desk, staring at a textbook. He had been waving his flames in a spiral pattern on his left hand for the past 3 days. He extinguished the fire when someone knocked on his door and gave the all-clear to the person. It was Midnight, and she had a gentle look on her face. She made a light-hearted remark, your number 1 fan is still excited to meet you. Without saying anything, Izuku turned back to his book. On his bed sat Midnight. I know you have your reasons, and they're justified, but are you positive you're making the right call? Izuku flipped through his book. She's the only student that knows my face. Her first course of action will be to arrest me. My best option is to let her run into me when I'm a student, tell her about my rehab with the principal, and go from there. Midnight grinned a little. Izuku moved to the next page without turning around and said, I don't think that's true. Yes, she's seen your face and would probably recognize you, but it wouldn't go the way you imagine. You know, she also heard what you said the day you burned out. His voice was low as he said, I remember. Midnight scowled, missing the point. She caught Hawks as he fell. I just happened to be in his grasp at that moment. Izuku went to the next page without responding to the question, so you think she would have just let you fall and die? You know what she did after you were sent to the hospital? She absolutely bombarded Ryukyu, Hawks and I with questions. Things like, how do you know him? You've known him for how long? Izuku? Like Izuku, Teleki's son? Izuku gritted his teeth in rage at that last one. A poor illustration. However, the main question she had was, what did he go through? Who injured him? Will he be all right? Are you going to assist him? Izuku shut his textbook and simply gazed out the window. She's been worried about you since she saw how broken you were by the world. Izuku's expression softened slightly, but Midnight couldn't see it. It's not just about her being a hero and you being the sort of bad guy. You don't want another seemingly kind person to resent you again. Midnight arose to depart. With that, Midnight left the young teen's room, leaving him with a lot to ponder. I can't force you to face her. If you really don't want to interact with her, fine. But you could at least give the person who worried about you a chance. Surely, she deserves that. In the meantime, after returning to her room, Najire collapsed on her pillow. Her door was knocked on, and she said, come in. A redhead girl her age entered after witnessing her normally cheerful buddy in such despair. She sat down on the floor against Hato's bed and said, hey Najire, what's up? Najire reclined on her side and raised her head. Yu, have you ever met someone you immediately want to know more about? The redhead gave a nod. Yeah, actually, in middle school, this guy. But everyone tells you to either stay away or that he's bad news. That portion seemed to turn Yu off a little. Sort of, but that was more like a celebrity crush I had on a punk band member. And he's had his body broken in ways that makes you question how he's still alive. And that he might kill you if you ask the wrong question, but you still want to ask anyway? Yu remarked, you've lost me. With a dejected groan, Najire buried her face in her pillow. The following day from above, Najire patrolled a quiet junction. She was always lifted by the joy of flight. The sensation of weightlessness, as though the objects securing her were momentarily removed, allowing her to glide through the air carelessly. This time, though, it didn't really lift her spirits. She was struggling mightily to get off the Green Devil. I didn't mean to pun. Does he remain incarcerated? Did they simply choose to murder him without my presence? Is it the reason they aren't communicating with me? I'm hoping Ryukyu will share something with me. I'm going crazy over this. Yes, exactly. Today, Najire patrolled alone. Ryukyu thought it was time to have a little more faith in Najire because she was about to begin her 3rd year. She was unable to ruin the day after her mentor chose to give her more responsibility. Work first, ask questions afterward, and never provide a response. A boy with a rucksack and a chip on his shoulder was strolling through the streets wearing a black shirt, light gray zip-up hoodie with green accents, and matching jeans. Izuku was looking for a quiet location to study, but he couldn't really benefit from the outside calm because of all the things racing through his mind. He kept thinking about what Midnight had said to him. Why am I getting so worked up over this? Damn it. Izuku, be realistic. She will have the common sense to either avoid me or arrest me, whether or not I am a student. When my classmates eventually discover who I am, it will be the same. His ultimate objective of killing himself and all for one hasn't altered. The truth is that you don't deserve a real school experience. He still feels the consequences of his conduct and believes he has forfeited his right to a happy life. He sees Hawks and the others as offering him a chance to make amends in the hereafter. Izuku crossed the road when the pedestrian crossing permitted it, despite being engrossed in his thoughts. Unfortunately, he didn't detect a speeding car approaching him since he was too preoccupied with his own thoughts. Watch out! Izuku was swept into the instant before he became roadkill, and all he saw was a blue blur. Phew! That was a close one, bellowed a high voice next to him in relief. The speedster was held down from above by a spiraling wave of energy that stopped his car on the ground. Najire had landed on a low rooftop out of sight to tend to her rescuee until the cops arrived to deal with the speedster. For someone who almost died, you don't seem too freaked out. Have you had close calls like that a lot? She inquired upon landing. As his feet struck firm ground, Izuku remarked, "You'd be surprised. Anyway, thank you for saving me. I appreciate it. I've got a lot on my mind." As the hinges of her jaw relaxed, Najire trailed off, "Hey, don't I know what that's like? I'm just glad you're safe." At last, she recognized the person in her arms. When she and the person she saved finally looked at one another, their green and royal blue eyes met and were unbreakable. "Fuck me. Idiot, it's you. You're here, and not in prison," Izuku said, clumsily. Hi." Najire was experiencing a mental breakdown, so he wasn't sure what to do. Her intensely demanding and inquisitive eyes were suddenly in his face. Najire would have wanted to continue, but instead she heard whispers from the throng below, asking where the hero was. "I've got billion questions. What's your quirk? How's it so strong? Why are you not in Tartarus? Are you and Midnight close? How old are you? I've got so many questions." Izuku said, "Sounds like you have stuff to do." Najire let out a loud moan and collapsed onto her back like a baby. She rapidly recovered, though, and her expression was unusually solemn. "There's a kappa copyright that way," Najire said, prodding her shoulder with her thumb. She said, "Wait for me there. I want answers," in a beautiful, childlike voice, but it sounded just as menacing as she meant. Since Izuku had no other choice, he just nodded. Izuku was left on the roof as Najire sprang from the building to confront the police and her admirers. He defied his better judgment and complied with Hado's requests. Izuku stood outside the small eatery, feeling a mixture of anxiety and fear, albeit his expression was less pronounced. Taking out his phone, he made the decision to call someone. The Ua Namori held an open envelope and a visitor's pass in front of her and hummed to herself. Her phone rang while she was going about her daily activities. Finally, ahem. "Hello." Izuku jumped right in and asked, "Midnight, can you tell me anything about Hado?" "Certainly, she's on the verge of starting her third year, has a strong and versatile quirk called Surge and is going to be your upperclassman. She's a sweetheart with, I admit, childish tendencies, and is probably strong enough to beat you with your gauntlets on." With a clearer idea of what he was getting into, Izuku absorbed all that knowledge. "Right, thanks." Midnight inquired, "Where are you right now, by the way?" Izuku gave an eye roll. "Do I really need to answer that, or are you just going to admit that my inhibitor gauntlets also double as trackers and that you know I'm outside a restaurant in Hado's jurisdiction? By the way, I can hear the poorly hidden eagerness in your voice. It is not a date or whatever you're thinking." Izuku ended the call before Midnight could speak to him again. Izuku heard something rapidly coming in the distance as soon as he hung up. The next thing he knew, a powerful wind gust and an unknown blue flying object were passing over his head, nearly knocking him off his feet. A teenager with violet hair was approaching him when the dust settled. Izuku took a deep breath and braced himself for what lay ahead. Izuku was quickly escorted into the restaurant by Najire. They were shown to a VIP seating area by a staff member who had become acquainted with the young heroine. In a sophisticated booth with a white tiger print soundproof curtain, they sat face to face. Nobody would listen to what they were saying. Izuku let out a defeated sigh. "As long as nothing we discuss leaves this booth, I'll answer anything you have to." "How old are you? What's your name? Why are your flames green? How long have you been free? Why do you have so many scars? I Stelaki your mom." Goddamn. Really quick questions that are answered in a one breath. For a minute, Izuku was truly astonished and speechless. Najire began again, but it was her turn to be interrupted. Sorry, let me start again. The final one was more certain than the others. 15, Izuku. I don't know, since March 3rd, I've been through a lot, and no. Najire's flash barrage of questions stunned Izuku, but he managed to catch them. Najire was taken aback because no one had ever comprehended her speaking that rapidly. The blue-haired girl said, Izuku, huh? Well, I'm Najire Hato from UA. It wasn't so hard to breathe in their small space just now, rather than the gravity of an interrogation. Can I ask about your quirk? It's so unique. I've never heard of fire that can go hot and cold, and block telekinesis. The closest comparison I can think of is Burnin, but you're not related to her, right? Then Izuku put his palm to the back of his head and said, No, I'm not. That only increased Najire's eagerness. So, you want to know about my quirk? There's a lot to unpack. He didn't want to disappoint her, for some reason. Inhaling, he thought back to the night that his life was altered. When Najire said, My quirk manifested when I was 13, her eyes grew wide. Wow, you put late bloomers to shame. Is there a reason it was at 13? Did puberty trigger it? And if you only got your quirk 2 years ago, how'd it get so strong? Shouldn't it still be a baby quirk? When Najire referred to his quirk as a baby quirk, Izuku nearly grinned. According to Detective Tsukachi, the doctors who retested me gave me a new diagnosis. A quirk growth spurt. I'm the only one who's gotten it so far. I don't know if normal quirk holders can have it, if it's for late bloomers only, or if it's just me, but basically it causes quirks to grow in strength over a frighteningly short period of time. Najire gave a nod. Yeah, you're crazy strong. You beat All Might in a punching competition. All Might. He's like, the best puncher in the world. Izuku's eyes went dark. I beat him, sure, but it came at a price, Izuku said, angrily pointing to the numerous scars on his hands. My arms were ravaged inside and out. The doctors that patched me up said there was a good chance my arms would be unusable. Izuku flinched as Najire took off her gloves and softly grasped his hands. Ignorant of Izuku's feelings, she said, Ooh, they feel pretty rough, and bumpy, too. Why are they bumpy? To be honest, if he was unaware of his own emotions, how could she know? My bones were shattered and fragments got stuck in my joints. My arms weren't as difficult to repair, but putting together finger bones isn't so easy. Izuku stated to her. Instead of pulling away, Najire began to caress and rub Izuku's hands. His skin was rough, scarred, and calloused. Hers was soft. Izuku's eyes grew wide as she said, That sounds crazy painful. Sorry, I feel sorry. Sincere pity. For the person who destroyed so many lives. Hey, your hands are getting warm, Najire said as she leaned in her chair and looked into his eyes. Are you doing that on purpose or is it like a nervous tick kinda thing? Are you nervous? Izuku opened their booth's soundproof curtain before he could respond, as if, Excuse me, are you two ready to ord? The waiter paused when he saw Hato leaning toward him with gleaming eyes while clutching Izuku's hands in hers. He gave a playful smile. Do you need a bit more time? Izuku withdrew his hands from Najire's and said, Can I get a glass of ice water? Oh, we're starting with drinks? I'll have my usual, please. It was noted by the waiter. A cream soda float and iced water. Izuku raised his palm to his face and said, Coming right up. I'll try not to take too long. Najire tilted her head in perplexity. Huh, what did he mean by that? After their drinks arrived, Najire said, Hey, is there a reason you got iced water? If you're hot, you could have gotten a float like me. Najire's eyes suddenly brightened again. This sort of help keeps my quirk's temperature from rising too high. And I don't have much of a sweet tooth. This was a significant topic of conversation between them. Right? Your quirk. You never finished telling me about it, oddly enough, though. Hato's zeal and childlike joy somehow calms Izuku. Izuku sighed, set down his glass, and started. I was quirkless for 13 years of my life. Being a hero is all I wanted out of life, not just because my mom was, but it's what I wanted myself. It was world-shattering to learn that I was in the 20% of people who never develop a power. But whatever I improved them dead wrong. Najire gave a nod. She flinched when she heard Izuku growl low, then take a big swallow of his drink and exhale steam. I'll say, you're massively strong. But surely you had your family and friends helping you through it, right? I know that's what mine would have done for me. Wow, Hato pondered. You would think, but the fact is I was born powerless into a family of heroes. There was no place for me there. At home, I was unseen, unheard, unimportant. At school, I was my best friend's favorite punching bag, with the rest of the school eager to follow suit. And of course, my genius prodigy of a sister was given all the attention and praise. As Najire listened to his story, her smile vanished. Did he spend the most of his life in such a manner? She could see how that would ruin his perspective on the world. Dang. Izuku gripped his forearm and nodded. Wait, you have a sister? Because last year I met a green-haired girl who isn't even in high school yet, and she and her boisterous blonde companion spent a lot of time with Teleki and All Might. Obviously, TCH. They simply never stop ruining them. Izuku spat scornfully. Well, does your terrible past include All Might as well? What part does he play? Did you also have no quirks, thus was he a jerk to you? Sadness filled Izuku's gaze. Yes. The day my quirk appeared, I met him, but things didn't work out well. I questioned him if someone without a quirk could become a hero after he rescued me from a villain attack. I couldn't, he said. I was urged to quit by the man I had admired since I first laid eyes on him. It's just one more blow to my dying hope. Najire appeared interested, but not quite as enthusiastic as before. Really, did All Might tell you to quit? However, he never stops grinning and exclaiming, you can become a hero, but he advises you to end things? I guess that, you can do it, drivel is only for those with quirks. Najire pouted and puffed her cheeks, asking why being quirkless is so important. You remain a human being. What if you're not the same? Everybody is unique. Some people can shoot fire from their lips, have lengthy tongues, or have lizard feet. In a way, being unique is what makes you unique. It is quite something to be powerless in a world where power is normal. Izuku stopped and gazed at the girl, her eyes wide and glowing, and even though he knew she was telling the truth, he could not believe such a person existed. This girl. Oh, I apologize for interrupting. I just lost my temper. Izuku cleared his throat and said, it's all right, but he went on, anyway, I just strolled home lifelessly after All Might rescued my life and took away my main motivation for existing. What did I return home to, and did I care if I was attacked again? My sister despises me, and my parents refuse to look at me. The fact that you were attacked didn't bother them? You might have perished, Najire yelled. Wasn't the first time I came home hurt and no one cared. Najire ordered a bowl of ramen, which is her comfort food, and Izuku ordered a bowl of soup, which is simple to digest and was the meal he had when he first met Rei. So you fled your house, became really depressed, and then your peculiarity appeared? Izuku nodded in response to Najire's question. Did you ever consider returning home? You had a peculiarity, even though people were rude to you. They'd be better to you, wouldn't they? To be honest, my first thought was to go back to them, Izuku said, setting down his spoon. In order to join the family. However, I later came to the realization that I would be a member of the family that abandoned, mistreated, and tortured me because I was different. But they were very eager to forget about me. Just because I have a quirk doesn't mean I'll act like the past never happened, Izuku said, clenching his fists. How are you aware of that? Uncertain if she wanted to hear what she would hear, Najire questioned. Yes, I returned home. Several times. Unsurprisingly, I was invisible each time, and I discovered who I truly am to them. Izuku's eyes were glowing with pain, sorrow, and hatred. If appearances could kill, then anyone who made eye contact with him would be dead. Najire saw the look in his eyes and was terrified, even though it wasn't directed at her. I assumed it was because I was the helpless black sheep that was shunned, but there's much more to it than that. Izuku sucked out steam and took another sip of his icy water, saying, I don't get to complain about my pain after everything I did. You endured more than many others, and hurt people, Najire exclaimed. Self-resentment replaced Izuku's fury, and he said, and I put innocent people who have nothing to do with my pain through hell. The heroine in training slouched on the table with her arms in front of her, and Najire's heart fell as she stared at Izuku. She wanted to stay and continue chatting, maybe about anything else that still affected him, but a ding from her phone interrupted her. Oh man. I have patrolling to do still. I want to continue TAA Alkying GG. It was a little reassuring to share his past with someone, and Izuku didn't know why, but he wasn't ready to part from her either. Writing also helped, but this was different, and it was unfortunate that it had to stop. Can I have your number? Hado inquired. What? Startled by the unexpected inquiry, Izuku said, may I have your number? So that we may continue our conversation. I take it you have a phone? I do. Izuku answered before he knew it. Najire's eyes sparkled. Great, after that, we can stay in contact. Izuku gave Najire his phone against his better judgment, and she promptly added his number to hers. I finish my shift in the afternoon, he said. Izuku later. With her curiosity satisfied for the time being, Najire skipped out of the restaurant but not before paying for the meal at the front desk. Izuku was sitting at the table with 2 bowls of unfinished food. Sigh, hey, can I take this with me? Afterwards, with the leftovers of his and Hato's lunches in styrofoam cups, Izuku returned to the dorms and declared, I'm back. He proceeded to the kitchen and placed the cups in the refrigerator, and as he closed the door, Midnight appeared as if out of nowhere. Izuku sighed, knowing what was going to happen. So, how was the date you had with one of the most attractive females in school? Not a date, an interrogation. Izuku laughed. Honey, you went to a restaurant and shared a meal, and that girl is too bubbly and curious to make an interrogation serious. A date? Izuku thought as he walked back to his room, set his backpack down, and lay down on his bed. Looking back, what he did with Najire reminded him of the time he met Uraraka and Mount Lady on his birthday, which he wrote off as a date at the time because he still had a tiny part of him that thought it might be. Izuku scoffed and went to study since he had been sidetracked earlier. It was 3 in the afternoon, and Izuku was expecting Najire to message him shortly, so he heated up the leftovers and took them to his room, where he leaned against the ledge with his back to the campus, and when his phone buzzed, he knew who it was and changed the ID to Hato. Hato. Guess who gets to talk for the remainder of the day? Izuku. Because I don't want someone to come in on your end and get the incorrect idea, I don't think we should do it over the phone. Hato. Well, you're right. My friends claim I spend a lot of time on my phone. Would you like to get together again? Izuku. Well, since first-year students haven't arrived yet, I can't go to your dorms, so I think it would be better if you came to mine. A pause occurred. Hato. You have a spot here at UA? Did you mention your dorm? Izuku. Yes, I believe you were aware of that. I can open the balcony door for you. I reside in the 3rd floor left wing of the teacher's hostel. Izuku. Are you still present, Hato? Izuku was taken aback by the sudden silence, but he quickly realized what it was when he turned around and saw a blue and yellow energy missile heading directly toward him. What the? Slam. Najire's body collided with Izuku's, and the two fell into the latter's room, landing on top of the greenette with a broad smile and sparkling eyes. I knew. It was something I knew. I knew there was another person present, all along. It was you. I've searched everywhere for you. You were hiding from me. But why? Najire finally received vindication, but her tone changed from joy to bewildered indignation. The door opened abruptly, and Hawks said, Heyo, what's going? Hawks entered, but halted upon noticing Izuku and Najire's condition, and the 3 of them paused, staring at one another awkwardly. Do you at least have protection? Hawks inquired. Izuku launched a stream of green flames and aimed his palm at the bird, blushing. Ah, whoa, uncle. Uncle. As he exited the room with a stench of burnt feathers, he shouted. Seated on Izuku's lap, Najire grabbed his shoulders and gave him a back-and-forth shake. Hawks is here, too. Is he a teacher as well? I have a ton of questions. Just like that, her curiosity was piqued once again. When the brunette finally stopped shaking Izuku, he looked into her eyes. I'll fill you in, but first, please leave me alone. Oh, right. Najire floated off his lap, grabbed his hand, and hauled him up with her. Have you been living here since you got out of prison? The high school senior asked, taking a moment to realize she was on top of him. Actually, why were you released in the first place? Was Hawks involved in this issue? What kind of relationship do you two have? Tell me. Let's go somewhere we won't be interrupted, Izuku said, walking to his desk and giving her remaining ramen in a cup along with a fork to eat it with. He stepped to the balcony and said, Come on. Have you kept this for yourself? Najire asked, but instead of answering, Izuku ignited green flames from the soles of his feet and flew to the roof. Psycho flames. Hey, hold on. Izuku took a sip from his remaining cup of soup and was ready for another round of questions as the brunette followed by soaring up herself. They sat on the dormitory building's roof, out of sight. Slurp. Why did you dye your hair woot, show? Gulp. Did you purposefully choose white, or was that just a way to conceal your identity? Najire inquired. Izuku went on to say, both, adding, before I met someone with white hair, it was just a hue I picked up for no particular reason. They treated me rather well. In order to remember them and protect myself, I continued dyeing my hair. I stayed sane thanks to that. Thanks to Hawks, Ms. Midnight, and Principal Nezu, you and Lady Nagant are currently in some sort of rehabilitation program after being in Tartarus. Izuku nodded. Najire placed a palm beneath her chin and pondered for a while, thinking, if Ms. Nagant is going to be a teacher, then that must imply She gently craned her neck towards Izuku, the knowledge hitting her as hard as it had hit him earlier. You intend to enroll here as a student? That means I'm going to get to be your senior, she cried, causing Izuku to flinch a little and blow back his hair. Najire gripped his shoulder, causing him to stare at her as she enthusiastically danced up and down. This is absurd. Which course are you enrolled in? Tell me it's the hero course, please. Izuku was taken aback by Najire's vivacious, positive demeanor once more, as if she had forgotten his identity and accomplishments. Why yeah, I'll be in the hero course, he replied, causing Najire to squeal with delight, but then she was confused once more. But you're already extremely strong, aren't you? More powerful than any Japanese professional. What if you kill someone by accident? I have these. Izuku drew aside the sleeve of his hoodie to show off one of his inhibitor gauntlets, and Najire stared at the svelte silver device. That's the first thing you said that makes sense to me. I'm approximately on par with a first-year student right now because I can only do 10%. Najire stroked the gauntlet with fascination and said, Niece, hey, does that imply that I would prevail in a fight? You know, I'm pretty strong. Izuku did not contest that. Believe me, I am aware of it. I can still clearly recall our first encounter. You mean when I sent you to the ground after you beat All Might? Najire asked, tilting her head. Izuku nodded. You did not forget me. Izuku rolled his eyes as she giggled, saying, hey, let's go sparring. Apart from how it appeared, I still don't know much about your oddity, but I want to witness your moves. VVVV. When Najire's phone vibrated, she realized it was a message from one of her pals and took it out of her pocket. Izuku heard the word that patrols would temporarily take a backseat and that the third-year students needed to be in the dorms for a meeting regarding pre-semester training, and she groaned in displeasure. Izuku finished his soup and grumbled, I guess that's the bell. Then his phone buzzed, revealing a message from Hawks. Hawks. It's your time to prepare dinner. Izuku was unaware that Najire had read the text to her, peering over his shoulder, and said, Hey, you can cook? Izuku massaged the back of his head and said, If you recall, we were kind of preoccupied with serious talk. You never mentioned that at the restaurant. All right. Could you prepare some food for me? I'd like to sample your yums. Izuku groaned and said, I'll make something tomorrow after we spar. Najire raised her arms in joy and said, Yay, I'm very excited, I'm very excited. Izuku gave the happy girl a very small smile, and strangely enough, she seemed thrilled to see him. It made him feel something in his chest, not a cold resentment or a burning hatred, but something warm. The senior student's next statement truly resonated with him. I'm fortunate to have such a kind individual as my junior, she chirped. Izuku whipped his head to her, surprise written all over his face. Nice, he repeated what she said. Najire's positive demeanor didn't change. Izuku, you are a very kind person. You would rather see people happy than sad, as Hawks stated. I'll see you later, though. Goodbye. Nice person. That's what she calls the monster that nearly destroyed a country? Took lives without remorse? Nearly hurt her and her teacher? Izuku asked himself as he watched Najire fly away, leaving a glittering trail of golden light embers from her soles. She mentioned that Hawks tried to reach him after they finally stopped him, and that Najire was present when he revealed his true self to them. Hawks thought that Izuku would prefer to see the world have a better, more prosperous future than to burn it all down and say goodbye to it all with a lack of affection. I deserve to die. It almost seemed like he was asking for death since he was conscious when Hawks tricked the world with a fake execution. But of course, the winged hero kept pushing. He got Izuku to reveal his mission he was fighting tooth and nail for. I'll kill him. To make amends. Najire is aware that he is capable of regret and longs for atonement, yet it would be an exaggeration to describe him as kind. Izuku got off from the roof and leapt down, hovering to his balcony, saying, She acts like I'm not the guy who killed without hesitation. She may know my backstory, but it doesn't justify me. I can't get too hung up on her. I know what's coming for me and no amount of wishing will change that. Hawks tells me you have a girl in your room the same day you met her, Izuku said as he re-entered his room, where Midnight stood with a smug expression on her face. She teased, Izuku practically threw her out, but it seems your quirk isn't the only thing that progresses quickly. Gamma Gym. After a challenging training time, a group of second and third year students were sweating and panting. This session was to gauge your capabilities, and no one has any reason to slack off on their training, the instructor said. Think of this as the start of the next year. Before dismissing the pupils, Mr. Aizawa added, I hope you didn't think things would be easy just because a threat is neutralized. Oh. A dark-haired lad with pointed ears exclaimed, Mr. Aizawa never gives us a break. He is difficult, to be sure, but he knows we can handle it. He is more aware than anyone of our strength. Tamaki, doesn't it make you feel better? A cartoonish-faced, muscular blonde said to his friend. Actually, Mirio, it makes me feel like curling up in a ball in my bed. After that, I could definitely use some R myself. See you everybody. As the sole person not leaving the gym, Najire waved. You're not coming, Najire? Mirio inquired. I'll be there shortly, you know, I still have gas left in my tank. You sure are energetic, Mirio said, laughing as he lifted his less active friend onto his shoulder. Well, see you later. Say goodbye, Tamaki. Their friend moaned. The remaining hero students then departed, leaving only the vivacious Najire to wait for her fighting partner. Izuku, who climbed through the window on the far side of the gym and landed on the concrete floor with a thud, said, When you sent me the message, I'd assumed it would be after you had a chance to recover. He took off the small bag that was slung over his shoulder and asked, Are you sure you can spar with me in your condition? He approached her and asked. Don't worry, I've got great stamina, Najire smiled. It was obvious that she was running low despite her daring remark. Aizawa truly showed no mercy. Maybe not a full spar, but fine. Where shall we go, then? I'd like to see your quirk. Izuku's green flames were once again visible to Najire, who blurted, Fine. She could feel the difference between his hot and cold flames, but not the fear he could evoke. Izuku moved his flames in various ways, launched himself from the soles of his feet, produced flaming swords and spears, wings like hawks, and, finally, green explosions. Najire was shouting and clapping by the end of the performance. It's my turn. She got to her feet, extended her hands, and released spirals of golden energy. My quirk is called Surge. I emit these shockwaves of energy from any part of my body. However, I've trained my endurance to sustain it for a time, even though doing it too much wears me out. Izuku placed a palm under his chin in contemplation as Najire used her peculiarity from the soles of her feet to hover over the gym. I've seen what you can do when you attack, you're a strong one, Izuku said. Your vitality is transformed into power, but it moves in a spiral pattern. Izuku noted, it would be faster in a straight line. As she landed in front of him, Najire whimpered, I knew, but that's the way things work out. Izuku was fully aware of the fact that it is sluggish, but it covers a lot of ground, and I don't mind being close. I've got an idea. Launch a stream of waves. Najire tilted her head and said, A little one. For what purpose? Najire followed his instructions and let forth a spiral stream of energy. Just try it. So what's this for? Najire was amazed by what they produced as Izuku launched a wave of flames that entered her energy and turned into a spiral tunnel of golden energy and emerald fire. Whoa! So awesome! Don't you think this would make a fantastic combination attack? Yes, but I wasn't aiming for that. Look at this. Najire focused on their combined powers, and her eyes widened. Her widespread energy narrowed, becoming slimmer and longer in range. Najire's eyes were stars as they ended the combo. Wow! A wide quirk turned into a long one. What did you do? Tell me. Tell me. She jumped up and down, demanding an answer. Well, I have control over the size, shape, and direction of my flames. I was able to control your power as well by combining them with your quirk. Najire was astounded. He can control other powers, too. What is he incapable of? Let's give it another go, she said excitedly. Izuku held out his hand again, but was surprised when Najire put hers right next to his, her forearm touching his inhibitor gauntlet. Go! She fired, and Izuku did the same, cutting off the flow of her energy. Thoom! Might have overshot that a bit. Izuku murmured, and the two of them had a single bead of sweat running down their foreheads as their combined might created a hole the size of a cannonball through the gym's wall. Tee-hee. Still in a positive frame of mind after what Izuku had assisted her with, Najire laughed. So, would you like to give it a try, huh? Izuku inquired. Do you believe I can? Izuku nodded. I noticed something. When you shoot, do you usually have your fingers spread wide? I believe so. Izuku anticipated a response along those lines. I don't think about it much, it just comes naturally. Try shooting with your fingers spread out like a tube. Najire nodded and tried it, lining up her fingers as he instructed. When she shot, the spiral energy was much faster and thinner than usual, and it flew farther and nearly as far as it had when Izuku had assisted her. Whoa! Whoa! I succeeded! I succeeded! I had little energy, yet it came quickly. With stars in her eyes, she exulted. Yeah, I noticed. Izuku said coolly, a faint smile on his lips. and then Najire was on top of him, giving him a strong hug. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Izuku was so taken aback by the pleasant physical touch that he failed to return the hug, flinching and about to pull away when he realized Hado had no evil or hatred in her. Izuku just stood there frozen when she released her grip and began using her new power. After 10 minutes Izuku sat next to her, staring at nothing, as Najire lay almost still on the gym floor, using her quirk excessively in her excitement and not realizing how quickly she was exhausting her already weary body. Najire slowly raised a shaky arm up to him, saying, "Poke." With a feeble voice, she touched Izuku's cheek and murmured, "What are you thinking about?" she inquired. Izuku pondered for a minute before responding to her, saying, "Hado, you, said I was kind yesterday." Najire nodded, not understanding how her seemingly straightforward statement confused him. "How am I of all people nice in your eyes? Almost all of my horrible deeds are known to you. How, therefore, can you give me a smile as if I accomplished nothing?" "Well, at first it was because you answered my questions, and you keep letting me ask you stuff." Izuku tilted his head, asking Najire to explain after her smile disappeared and she extended her hand to him. "Yeah, I have friends I can talk to, but I love learning about new people and new quirks," Izuku said, pulling her up into a sitting position. "Usually, when I go too deeply, people either avoid me or attempt to ignore my annoying voice." Izuku noticed Najire's gloomy expression for the first time. His heart tightened. Izuku thought, a curious mind eager to learn about the quirks of those around her? She's like him. Or at least, she's like he was. Yet, even though she has real friends, she still understands the pain of rejection, and if she can be a little over the top with her questions, she doesn't have any bad intentions. The image of a dejected, lonely Najire burned in Izuku's mind for some reason. "However, you continue to allow me to ask you more and more questions. Even when I was talking incoherently, you were able to understand me. That has never been done. I didn't even fully understand what I said. Then you let me into your room without the others' consent," she said, laughing. "It was very considerate of you to save our leftovers for us to finish together. Additionally, you helped me enhance my quirk today. You went above and beyond for me." Grr! After it let out a terrible, loud roar, Najire caressed her stomach, blushing and laughing. "Hee hee. I suppose I went overboard. Do you want a bite to eat? We might visit the cafeteria. Lunch Rush produces scrumptious meals. Have you ever tasted the food at Lunch Rush?" Izuku shook his head and stood up. Where are you heading?" "I had a feeling you wouldn't toe the line until you were dead tired and starving," Izuku said, moving toward the end of the gym and picking up his shoulder bag from earlier. He then sat down beside her again and unzipped the bag. He gave Najire a water bottle, which she promptly drank in a big gulp. Then a pair of chopsticks, which confused her, and finally, Izuku put a big blue bento box in her lap. Her gaze grew wide. Did you create this? You asked me to cook for you, remember?" she said, drawing Izuku's attention away from her. Once more, the Surge Quirk user drew Izuku into an unexpected embrace. "I'm amazed at how kind you are," she cried out. Najire then took off the bento box's lid. Holy cow! It looked like something from one of those gourmet cooking shows she occasionally watches, and the smell made her drool the moment it reached her nose. She took her chopsticks and cautiously picked up a piece of beef and put it in her mouth, closing her eyes as she bit down on the meat, its flavors and juices delighting her senses. Her eyes blew open as she swallowed, her pupils now full of stars. "I believe that my mother is in love," she shouted as she began stuffing her face at blurring speeds. Izuku watched as the food he prepared was practically shoved down a bottomless pit. Najire was crying profusely as she ate. Show goo hood. Her mouthful masked what she was saying. "Hey, watch out. You might." Najire abruptly stopped eating and placed a hand on her chest and struggled to breathe. "Choke." Izuku finished with a deadpan. Izuku arched her forward and patted her back until she coughed up a bone. "You were trying to eat a bone. Everything in here is just so delicious," Izuku inquired, looking genuinely shocked. Izuku's culinary abilities might turn out to be a double-edged sword, Najire complained. Burp. "Ah. So stuffed." Izuku smiled next to her, laughing at her antics, but Najire caught it and exclaimed, "I'm going to have terrible hiccups later, but it was worth it." Najire groaned as she patted her distended belly. "What?" Izuku inquired. Hee. Izuku scowled at her, saying, "I'm sorry, but you usually have a mean, angry face, so seeing you smile is a breath of fresh air. You look good when you smile. Did I bring a grin to your face?" "Yes, I did." "Fantastic. This girl is a mystery," Izuku said, turning his head away from her. Come on, let's get back before someone begins looking for us. Izuku got up and headed toward the gym exit, but he didn't feel Najire move much from his position on the floor. A little help? You can't be serious, Izuku moaned in her head as she questioned, stopping and turning. Previously, she was too hungry and exhausted to move, but now she's too full and exhausted to move. Whoa! Najire squealed in the air. Izuku had no choice but to give her a piggyback ride to the dorms. He kept them airborne with his quirk, trying to focus on balance rather than the sizable mounds pressed against the nape of his neck. You're very powerful, you know? You made it seem so simple to pick me up. We ought to do this more frequently, Izuku said. Sure, when you're paralyzed and I'm the only person around. Najire cheered. Najire was gentle, and Izuku didn't mind. She pouted and put her chin on his head, feeling his soft, largely black and green hair as she ran her fingers through it. Your hair is so soft, it's like a cloud, Najire said. Which type of conditioner do you use for your hair? Najire gaped in disbelief as Izuku responded. And none. You mean it stays this fluffy naturally? That's incredible. Hey, when you're under stress, do you ruffle your own hair? If my hair were as fluffy, I'm sure I would. When I'm feeling anxious, may I ruffle your hair? I won't be your personal stress reliever. Boo. It would be dangerous for Izuku to travel any farther than this, so he landed just outside the instructor's dorms, which were near the third years. Can you make the rest of the trip on your own? Izuku put Najire down and said, I think I'll be fine. Izuku caught her as she fell forward after she stated, nearly hitting her face on the ground. Are you okay? Oh, for heaven's sake, he said, and Najire offered him a brilliant smile while closing his eyes and holding a peace sign in one hand. How could I have ever feared you? He whispered the final line. What? And Najire caught it. She stared at him with big, curious eyes. Izuku's heart skipped a beat as he realized what he said out loud. Now Najire had his undivided attention with eyes wanting him to elaborate. You were terrified of me? How? Why? How could you be afraid of me? Izuku groaned and put her down on the pathway, looking away from her. Your gauntlets don't take away from your strength. Some of my classmates still get nightmares about you, you know. Najire gave a charming little twist of her head when Izuku replied, that's kind of why. You were there when I finally burned out. I nearly killed other heroes, as you witnessed. I was the reason Death Arms retired. It simply seems like. Izuku placed his head in his arms and said, you can't recall what was directly in front of you. After a few moments of silence, Najire said, I do remember, and I think about it a lot. However, I also recall the other things you did. You prevented criminal gangs from capturing heroes and saved lives. What did you say when you were feeling low, do you recall? You were pursuing a very evil man, and you are still attempting to make amends in your own way. I recall what you told me, too. Before you were pushed over the edge, you suffered for years. Yeah, you've done some really bad stuff, but you've also done some good stuff, she said, smiling at Izuku as he raised his head to gaze at her. Additionally, you want to make up for the negative things. I'm just glad you're still a decent person at heart despite everything. After a long embrace, they withdrew, with Izuku rubbing something out of his eye and whispering, Thank you, Hado. After a while, Najire gave Izuku another hug, but this time, he didn't pull away. Instead, he hugged him back for the first time. Call me Najire at any time. It is only fair that I address you by your first name, isn't it? Izuku laughed dryly and said, I guess, Najire. He helped her stand up, and this time she managed to keep upright. She held onto his rough hand and grinned at it, saying simply, I like how your hands feel. Izuku remarked, you really should get going. Najire released his grip and walked away with unsteady legs, but not before giving him a final wave and smile over her shoulder, which he returned before she was gone. What the hell is she doing to me? Izuku could still feel her gentle touch on his rough skin as he stood still in front of the dorms, wind blowing in his hair, and repeatedly clenched his right palm into a fist. Crunch. Dang. I thought for sure they'd kiss. Hawks moaned, but his easy smile remained. This is much better than my dramas. Izuku jumped at the sound of a crunch and turned to see Midnight and Hawks standing outside the dorm, the former holding a bowl of popcorn. Midnight snatched up another handful of popcorn and gushed. Izuku aimed his hand at the professionals listening in, and his entire body was ablaze with a glistening blaze. That's it, I'm killing you both. Apartment complex Musutafu Bakugo and Melissa returned to the Yagi's hometown after a plane voyage from Tokyo. Although Toshinori and Inko weren't very excited about it, it was so they could be close to the children when they started high school in a few days. However, Melissa was thrilled to see her friend's neck of the woods. Although it was a hellhole for a while, Significant progress has been made in the restoration process. The three of them could undoubtedly spend their final days before UA exploring the area, having a good time, and creating memories to share with her father. Without turning around, Katsuki waved, saying, "I'm heading back to my parents, see ya." Behind him was Izumi. Melissa attempted to follow them. "Hey, can I come? I'd like to meet your parents, Kachan." The brunette and the spiky blonde paused before the door. Izumi replied venomously, "This is none of your business." Melissa flinched because she had never experienced such a callous resignation from a relative. Or referred to as family, nonetheless. Bakugo and Yagi left the quirkless to ruminate in her loneliness without saying anything further. Once more. Burned Cemetery. Izumi and Katsuki took a train from the apartment and reached their location. The former's former residence and the destroyed debris that served as the last resting place for her departed family members. New homes could not be constructed in this location without running the risk of collapsing due to the damage. Some were afraid that the devil would be able to possess a host. If they lived there. People are afraid they'll do anything when they can seemingly do anything. Izumi said, "Hi. Dad. Grandma." As she attempted to face the past, Katsuki provided emotional support. For the most part. Regretfully, the Green Devil's fire destroyed Nana, Hisashi, and Izuku's portraits. The poor thing had nothing with which to grieve. A part of her wishes she had done as Izuku had done. He never missed a day of prayer to Hisashi and Nana while he was living. "I wish it wasn't from above. I wish you could have a front row seat, Dad, Grandma, and Izuku. Just sit back and watch, like you should have. Then you'd still be here. UA is right around the corner. We're looking forward to becoming great heroes. Just watch us." Suddenly, a gust of wind blew dust into them and away from the deceased. Izuku's restroom. Izuku let out a sigh and relaxed in his bathtub's hot water, his toned, rough, scarred, lean yet muscular, nearly nude body. Yep, he bathes in his gauntlets. Nezu hasn't yet given him the key to take them off. This was a calculated move in response to Midnight's constant taunting regarding his bond with Najire Hado. This is exactly what the dominatrix said. That Hado, her curiosity is insatiable, and she's especially drawn to you. TCH. She's simply trying to get a rise out of me, damn you, Midnight. He let out his anger and attempted to close his eyes. Hado and I are just friends, and that alone is far more than I could ask for. His body was motionless, but his mind was not. He still found a bath, a basic necessity, odd. Compared to the bloodbaths he had to take in middle school and on the streets, it was a huge improvement. Oh no, the flashbacks are coming. Izuku's twin sister was considerate enough to put him into Aldera's little koi pond to cool off and clean up, after Bakugo had reduced him to a barely conscious, smoldering heap. He returned because his tormentors weren't finished with him, not because he wanted to. It was unbearably frustrating that his parents thought he caused trouble for himself but never looked into it, instead sending him to his room. Izuku's bath water heated up, bubbling and releasing a thick, reprimanding steam that filled the entire bathroom. He was indifferent. He was too preoccupied with his suffering to pay attention. A more recent memory emerged, and his peculiarity cooled. One that filled him with self-hatred. It was unclear on this one. He recalls battling off a group of criminals before passing out on the ground. It occurred at a time when his acts were causing society to collapse. His face was exposed since he was so worn out that he was unable to maintain his fires. He felt vulnerable and vulnerable. It said, "Are you all right?" Izuku's head snapped back to its origin. A family of 4 caught his eye. A mother, her older brother, a father, and a daughter. It also frightened him. The level of adrenaline was high. He clenched his chest, gasping for air and rushing to get away from the bewildered and anxious crowd. The mother would remark, "Hey, easy." But Izuku didn't hear her. He saw the son coming nervously toward him. He was unaware of the boy's healing ability, but Izuku's worry took over and he started seeing hallucinations. The boy, wearing an Aldera uniform, came toward him with a sly smile and smoky palms. "Back," was his mumble. The boy was too close, but he halted. "I'm trying to help. Why?" Jumping to his feet, Izuku yelled, "Shut up, back off," and brandished a hot, blazing sword in his right hand. He swung his weapon toward the family. "Don't touch me." When he regained consciousness, he found himself standing by himself, covered in blood, encircled by green flames and the mutilated, burnt, and lifeless remains of the family who had only been kind to him. He just dimly recalls roaring fire, screaming, and frantic pleas for mercy. He went insane. It wasn't and won't be the first time. Izuku detested these recollections, yet if he could, he would not forget them. They are a part of him and the source of his energy. We must not forget the past. After unplugging the drain, he got out of the bathtub. His whole room turned into a steam room as soon as he opened the door. He let some fresh air into his balcony by opening the sliding screen door. With only a towel wrapped around his waist, he lay on his bed. He was on the verge of dozing off when he heard a vibration on his phone. Najire. Are we ready to spar? A dim beam of light broke through the storm that was building inside Izuku. Izuku. When you're ready. Najire. Gamma Gym. Izuku. That would be better. Though they should not be forgotten, his recollections can occasionally be neglected. The following day. Najire shook her head, muttering. Izuku questioned the sooty senior student. You okay? With a look of wonder, Najire shook her head. That was awesome. You were awesome. Explosions, and Endeavor's moves. You just keep me guessing, the brunette said. You surprised me, too. It didn't take you long to refine what I taught you into a new move. Najire flashed a radiant smile. Yup. My Najire pike is sharp, quick and dangerous. Thanks for helping me improve, Izuku. But I have a question. When I caught you, you just made everything blow up around me without lifting a finger. It was like you set the air on fire. When you parried my attacks, they didn't disappear. My power was still lingering around as embers. I'm able to reignite them at will, and you were in the middle of a whole cluster of explosions. Izuku reached out to assist Najire in getting up. If I want to beat someone stronger than me, I have to get creative. Even though Najire had not surpassed 50%, she was still working with a significant amount of power, and Izuku exceeded it by 10%. Shaking off the discomfort, Hato gazed at him in awe. Holy crap! What can't you do? Suddenly, a blur of brown and white rushed past Najire and struck Izuku. The latter raised his arms to shield his face from a rabbit's foot. He slid a few steps on his feet due to the intensity of the unexpected assault. Apparently, commit to one's sparring partner. Izuku halted his skidding and displayed a momentary expression of surprise. Is she disappointed that I haven't been berating her lately? He pondered. Both Mirko's combat smile and her playfully aggressive smile were absent. It was a stare and a frown. Even most villains can't see her with such contempt. I doubt that I will ever comprehend her. However, Izuku maintained a defensive stance, green flames burning in his palms. She seemed to want to hear the words, I've still got another round in me, you know. Mirko's battle-hungry smile reappeared as she licked her lips. You're gonna wish you hadn't said that, brat. Out of my way, blue hair, he's mine now. Mirko lunged at Izuku and passed Najire. Following the rabbit hero's instructions, the surge user used her quirk to keep herself a few inches above the ground as she moved out of the ring. She retreated to the wall to observe the altercation between the two. Izuku has also fought Mirko. How many times, I wonder? Was it a bad day for her? When she arrived, she appeared angry, but when Izuku promised to fight her, she grinned. I wonder if she prefers to let off steam like this. When Najire ran into something, her cognitive process came to a stop. Instead of a wall as she had anticipated, she saw a set of long lady legs. Glancing up, she recognized Lady Nagant, the newest faculty member and soon-to-be first-year heroics teacher. With her arms crossed and a severe expression on her face, the woman with the multicolored hair gave Najire the impression that she had just been caught with her hand in the cookie jar. Kana picked Hato up and said, hi Ms. Nagant. How are you, today? Without responding right away. The statement, could be better, was made casually by Kana. So, you lost your round with him, huh? After calming down, Najire responded. Kana rubbed the back of her head and said, yeah, though I didn't go all out, he caught me off guard. Hey, you were in the same prison as Izuku, right? Did you two get along? Well, he was the only one who didn't make me want to gag or fill with holes, so I guess. Najire gave a tiny giggle. When Snipe was brought up, Nagant's expression changed to a frown. So your quirk is Sniper. You and Mr. Snipe are great at long range. Ever consider teaming up? Najire flinched and pulled back her query. Your hair is used to make bullets harder than concrete, so how is it so soft-looking and flowy? You're like Izuku. I thought the smoke from his fire would make it all spiky and rough, but it's softer than my pillows. Does it hurt ripping off your hair? If you were to lift weights with your right arm, would it improve your quirk some way? Like a faster cycle rate? What if? Nagant considered Najire's seemingly incessant inquiries and concluded, Izuku was right, she's a weird one. After 20 minutes Najire continued questioning Nagant, as Mirko and Izuku continued to trade punches. The latter questioned whether these endurance freaks ever needed a vacation. As she approached Izuku and Mirko, who were fighting in close quarters, the woman with the indigo and pink hair exclaimed, "Okay. I'm stopping this now." It astonished Nejire. "You're going to stop them? How? Aren't they both stronger than you? No offense." Kana came to a complete halt. She stopped and gave Nejire a familiar sly smile over her shoulder. "Kid, are you forgetting? I'm a teacher, and here at UA," she said. Kana was ecstatic when Nezu and Aizawa told her, "We run things however we see fit." Lady Nagant prepared her sniper arm, aimed it at the rabbit and the demon child, and painlessly removed strands of her hair, twisting it into a pointed bullet. Whoa! The sound of a gunshot reverberated throughout the gym, and everyone froze. A purple blur sped straight past Izuku's and Mirko's faces, impaling the opposite wall while they remained still. After the first shock subsided, Mirko gave the marksman a growl. "What the hell?" Nagant's voice was cool and authoritative. She turned back to Nejire, who had her own wounds that she had forgotten about, and said, "You two are bloody and bruised. I don't need you killing each other. To the infirmary, all of you." The three of them followed her to the nurse's office without saying another word. "She's an excellent fit for Izuku, but I'm pleased she's not my teacher. Both of them are frightening," Nejire pondered. Standing outside the imposing gate of the nation's top hero school, a white-haired woman remarked, "UA is much bigger than I thought it would be." The fact that it was her beloved spouse Endeavor's school just made her discomfort worse. However, Rei suppressed those emotions, recalling her purpose for being here: to personally wish Izuku success on his entrance exam. Rei was given instant entry to the school grounds after presenting her visitor's pass to the gate censor. She was hoping that someone would help her find the instructor's dorm. As she prepared to leave for her vocation as a hero in training, a dazzling blue ball of optimism was soaring through the atmosphere. "Izuku will formally become my junior in only 2 days. He will undoubtedly pass the test. I believe he knows more than the teachers because he researched so much. Hilahim? Who is that?" Her gaze strayed to a strange white-haired head. As usual, Nejire's curiosity overtook her and she took a detour to speak with the new student. A girl wearing a brilliantly colored hero outfit fell in front of Rei, startling her. "Hey, are you looking for someone? I haven't seen you before," she inquired. Rei spoke after shaking off the surprise. Nejire nodded and grinned. "Why yes, can you help me find the teacher's dorm?" "Sure, follow me." So she did. While following the vivacious student to her destination, Rei noticed her examining her hair. After being apprehended, Nejire stated bluntly, "I like your hair." Rei reddened a little. Thank you, I like yours as well, miss." "I'm Rei," the ice woman said, offering her hand for a handshake, which the vivacious girl enthusiastically grasped. "Oh, sorry, my name's Nejire. What's yours?" "Nice to meet you, Nejire." "You too, Rei." They kept going down the route that led to the dorms. "So about your hair, is it naturally white or did you dye it?" "I have a friend who dyed his hair white." "Is it because of your quirk? Because you don't look old enough to have all white hair because of age." Rei created a veil of frost from her palm to illustrate her ice quirk, saying, "It's my quirk. I've had snow white hair since I was born, and I have an ice quirk." Nejire's gaze brightened. "Wow. That's a great power. I bet it helps when your refrigerator is down. Does overusing it give you hypothermia? How much can you produce before you need a rest?" "I'd love to see it." "Oh. By the way, are you going to be a teacher here? Is that why you're going to the teacher's dorms? What grade?" Did I say something funny?" Nejire was confused by Rei's giggles. She wasn't being cruel when she laughed. She stopped to catch her breath. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to talk down to you or anything, it's just, you're endearing. That childlike wonder of yours is refreshing, especially since my youngest son is a teenager already." Nejire's mouth hung slightly, and her eyes shone. Her motor mouth personality has been described as bothersome by many adults. Her face soon broke into a radiant smile. "You're like my friend, you're both really nice. I wonder if he thinks I'm endearing." Rei laughed once again. "I'm sure he does, dear." They reached Rei's destination after a delightful stroll. Rei bowed properly and said, "Thank you very much for helping me." Nejire waved and ran off, saying, "It's no problem. It was great talking to you, Ms. Rei. Well, I've got hero work to do, bye yee." Rei raised her hand to knock as she stood outside the dormitory's big doors. Ow. When her finger knuckles struck a forehead rather than wood, she withdrew her fist. Before she could knock, the door opened a second. From the third story, by the one who could sense her, Rei said, "Oh, sorry Izuku. I didn't mean to hit you." Izuku dismissed her apology. "It's fine, but what are you doing here? I wasn't expecting a visitor." Rei happily showed out her visitor's pass, which she had taken out of her luggage. "Midnight sent me this in the mail. I guess it was a surprise." Izuku was beaming. "I'll give her credit later." Izuku led Rei up to the spacious third-floor room. As Hawks, Midnight, and Nagant conversed with Rei, he prepared tea. "Tomorrow?" "Really?" Rei exclaimed, amazed. Although she was aware that Izuku's entrance exam was approaching, she didn't think he was about to take it. However, the other grown-ups appeared unconcerned. Midnight reassured her, "There's no reason to worry, he spends hours a day nose deep in textbooks." Kana gave a nod. "He's already strong as hell, so unlike others, he only has to worry about learning. And given how quick he picks things up, I wouldn't be surprised if he knows more than the teachers." She laughed. Hawks stated, "Well, I, for one, am worried," and held up his hand. Worried about his classmates' self-esteem. "They're gonna left in the dust by a middle school dropout." "I heard that," Izuku said as she entered carrying a kettle of jasmine tea, sugar, honey, and a tray of teacups. "You're the last person I want to hear from about leaving school due to quirk-related circumstances, Keigo." Hawks put a palm on his chest and let out a loud gasp. His startled eyes went to Lady Nagant, who was grinning. "You told him my name." Izuku replied, "We had a lot of chats sharing Tiny in Tartarus." The partnerships that Izuku ended up in made Rei grin. Izuku handed her a cup of tea and said, "It seems I didn't have to come and wish you the best, after all." He answered sincerely, "Maybe, but it's always nice to see you." Rei took the cup with a smile. It tasted good to her. "I'm your classmates are going to be as pleasant as the adults you trust. In fact, 2 minutes after I entered, a girl with very long blue hair, wearing a blue hero outfit helped me get here. She was delightful company." The room's vibe shifted. Hawks suppressed a giggle. Nagant rolled her eyes, Midnight's eyes glistened with joy, and Izuku coughed on his tea. Izuku said, "Why you ran into Hado?" "I think she stated that she would prefer that you, Izuku, refer to her by her given name." "Najire?" Midnight exclaimed too eagerly. Rei's gaze expanded. "Based on first names. That's intriguing." Hawks persuaded Izuku to prepare some spicy wings for supper by saying, "Yeah, Najire is going to be Izuku's upperclassman. The two of them have gotten pretty close, even trading numbers." Rei closed her eyes and laughed a little. "I see, it must be nice having a friend. That's what she called you." Izuku smiled. "Yeah, a great friend." He enjoyed the way his statement made Hawks and Midnight feel deflated. Rei had a great time discussing events like the sports festival and the cultural festival that the Ice Woman might be able to visit with Izuku and his guardians. Unfortunately, since Rei was still under their care, she had to return to the hospital. That won't last for long, though, since her mental health is getting better every day, and she plans to return to celebrate Izuku's exam success. To make sure she didn't get lost, Izuku decided to walk her to the gate. They encountered Najire once again en route, and he was pleased to bid Rei and Izuku farewell. But she paused and became aware of something. She rummaged in her purse for a short while before removing a rectangular object wrapped in wrapping paper, saying, "Oh, before I forget, I have something for you." Izuku remarked, "Rei, you didn't have to get me anything." Izuku grabbed the gift from Rei and started tearing through the wrapping paper. "I did have to get you this, and it's something you need. Please take it." "Ooh, what is it?" responded Najire. Izuku stopped when he noticed the curled black hair and recognized it as a photo frame. He raised his gaze to Rei's inquisitive eyes, but she simply nodded, telling him to continue. Izuku gradually tore the paper away, exposing a framed picture of a man with pleasant green eyes, a relaxed smile, black curly hair, and freckles on his nose and cheeks. Wearing a male nurse's costume, he stood with his arms crossed with pride. The individual was identified as Hisashi Midoriya by the nameplate at the bottom of the frame. While Izuku stood still and gazed at his father's portrait, Rei remarked, "I'm sure he'd want to see you just before you do something that'll make everyone around you proud." Beside him, Najire's wide eyes were flitting between Izuku, Rei, and the man's portrait, which appeared to be an older Izuku. "I hope you like," Izuku interrupted Rei as he hurried to embrace the mother at almost the speed of light. As she hugged him, Rei could feel his tears soaking through her clothing. They remained that way for a few minutes. Rei gave him a back rub. "I know you miss him. From what I hear, he was a wonderful father. I know he's very proud of who you're becoming." Sniffling, Izuku tightened his embrace, nearly squeezing Rei. "Thank you, Mom, so much." At last, they parted ways. More tears were streaming from Izuku's eyes than he had ever imagined he would. Rei needed to remove some of her own. Izuku's mother said, "I'll see you tomorrow. Please take care." And then she left him and his upperclassmen for the night. Najire gave Izuku a tap on the shoulder. For the first time, she was unable to speak and started crying. She gave him a piece of paper, which was also contained in the wrapping paper, while crying. Izuku read only the essentials through teary eyes. Employee information: last name. Midoriya Hisashi is his name. Worked for 18 years. Role: nurse. Family members: Izumi Midoriya, kid; Izuku Midoriya, child; and Inko Midoriya, spouse. Employer's comment: Hisashi Midoriya is without a doubt the most caring employee I've had the pleasure of dealing with, whether they are doctors, nurses, or secretaries. Mr. Midoriya possesses one of the world's largest hearts. His work ethic, timeliness, ability to remain composed under pressure, and occasionally sense of humor have all received great ratings from his coworkers and me. I get at least a dozen thank you notes for Mr. Hisashi every week. Every patient he has seen has smiled as they leave. He always finds it in himself to put the needs of others above his own, especially when he has 2 kids and a pro-hero wife who isn't always there. Hisashi Midoriya, who some kids have dubbed the hospital hero, will be sadly missed. May the eternally good soul of this guy rest in peace. Izuku clutched the paper and his father's image to his chest, and another flood of tears fell. The boy was crying, and Najire hugged him from behind, which he greatly loved. They remained that way until Izuku was prepared to return to the dorm after he put a hand on her arm. He didn't say anything when he got there, but for the moment, they only needed his puffy eyes and his father's photo. Najire. Your mother is Ms. Rei. Around 11 p.m., Izuku woke up to find Najire messaging him. It took some time for the shock of Rei's gift to subside. While she was still taking it all in, he wondered if she was able to catch any winks. Izuku. Indeed, and it's a fantastic one. Najire. I didn't imagine you'd go get a new mother when you mentioned that Teleki wasn't yours anymore. Izuku. It seems more like she had a new son. She discovered me the following morning and bandaged me after I passed out following a brawl on the street, which is how we first met. When I kept returning to see her, she even fed me. Najire. Oh, I see. So you were first like a stray puppy? Izuku. I suppose that's one way to phrase it. Najire. Your father, the hospital hero, seems like a really great man. He resembled you exactly. Izuku recalled his early years, when Hisashi was still alive, and grinned wistfully. Izuku. He was. It seemed as though he was observing me when I used to pray to him daily. Najire. He is, and he will see you do well on your test tomorrow. Speaking of which, you most likely need to sleep. Neither of them put down their gadgets for a moment. They were still interacting with one another online a short while later. Izuku. A late night wouldn't be too horrible because I'm writing my exam in the day. We could continue speaking, if you'd like. Najire. How exciting. Izuku just became aware of the repercussions of his behavior and declared, I'm not sleeping tonight. As they say, no good act goes unpunished. Exam day. As he left his room wearing his UA, Izuku remarked, it still feels weird wearing this uniform for the first time. He would allow Midnight to persuade him to wear it as he took his entrance exam. Either that or he had to explain why he had decided to sleep in for no apparent reason. When Midnight emerged, he blew a wolf whistle. When Midnight said, hot damn, your classmates aren't gonna be able to keep their hands to themselves when they see you, Izuku eye rolled. Hawks, Nagant, Mirko, Mount Lady, and she all praised his uniform and wished him luck on his test. The sensation that everyone was rooting for him to succeed rather than declaring it was impossible. Sincerely, he couldn't help but smile. Najire was waiting for him in her own uniform as he down the stairs and exited the building. She asked to be his chauffeur last night. He was unable to turn down the offer. As cheerful as ever, she exclaimed, hey, you're finally here, so how does it feel wearing the uniform? Exciting? As he formulated words in his mind, Izuku held onto the blazer's breast edge. Honestly, it feels pretty weird. For so long, I was so certain I'd never get to wear this as an actual student. And honestly, it feels like I'm filling a role meant for someone else. With a dazzling smile that cut through his black clouds, Najire put her hands on his shoulders. Well, you're here now, and I know you'll get in. Not just that, you'll excel. You're super smart, crazy strong, and really nice, even if you don't see it. You've got this. Izuku grinned, encouraged by Najire's motivational speech. He got a pinch on the cheek for saying, thanks Hato. She pouted, I told you, call me Najire. A gentle voice drew the attention of the two. Rei had arrived and had a clear view of Izuku and Nejire in their immaculate uniforms. "Oh good, I'm just in time. You look amazing, both of you, except." She proceeded to Izuku and started mending his rumpled tie. "I should make time to teach you how to tie a tie," she replied. Izuku turned red and turned his gaze from Nejire's excessively happy face to their mother-son relationship. Rei pulled Izuku into an embrace after finishing, and he immediately returned the embrace. "I know you can do this. Your father and I, and everyone else, will be waiting for you to come back with the good news." Izuku gave a nod. "Thanks, Mom." Izuku's eager chauffeur grabbed his hand as he released it. She shouted, "Come on, let's get going," as she began to levitate. Izuku used icy flames to propel himself up so as not to scorch the pavement. All right. As they flew, Rei waved them away with a smile. Nejire said a few final things before they were out of earshot. "Bye, Izuku's mom." Both Rei and Izuku had astonished fans when she said those words, but Rei's turned into a happy one. "She called me his mom." In the meantime, Izuku exclaimed, "What did you just call her?" Izuku had a drop of sweat when Nejire said, "Your mom. That's what she is, right? We're just missing some adoption papers." As soon as they arrived at the main building, Nejire was more than delighted to give him a tour. She would have shown him every inch of the academy if it weren't for Izuku's scheduled exam. She decided to show him the cafeteria, the changing areas, and the classroom where he would be taking his exam, which was in Class 1A. A human caterpillar was dozing on the floor behind the teacher's podium as Nejire opened the huge entrance. Nejire was not taken by surprise, but Izuku was. She yelled, "Mr. Aizawa! I brought your new student," at a volume and tone that prevented her from falling asleep. Rolling around in his sleeping bag, the man moaned. Nejire closed his eyes and grinned broadly at Izuku. She gave him a hug, and Izuku gave it back. He gave Rei a hug in return, though not as quickly. "I know you don't need it, but good luck." "Thanks, huh?" Nejire. He. The blue-haired girl waved him off after they went their separate ways. Aizawa, meantime, was complaining to himself. He inhaled deeply through his nose and exhaled out of his lips, saying, "One more year till she graduates. Shota, one more year till she graduates." Seated upright in his sleeping bag, the man looked directly at Izuku. "Your paper's on the podium. You've got 2 hours. Once you're seated, no getting up until time's up. When time's up, we'll take it to Nezu to grade personally." Izuku gave a nod. Izuku approached the podium as Aizawa yawned and lay back down. When he reached for the normal test, he discovered another document concealed beneath it. Izuku took up the other document instead. "Interesting." Tap, 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 tap. Mirko impatiently tapped her foot on the ground. Nagant remarked, "I think I can see your footprint in the floor." The hero rabbit sneered. She complained, "If he doesn't pass, I'm kicking his ass." "That won't happen. I'm sure he'll wow us like his assessment test way back when." Mount Lady replied. She still recalls Izuku's casual demeanor as he left Hawks and her jaws on the ground. She is unsure of what she will do if he performs a similar stunt again. Humming to herself while knitting, Rei was the most composed person in the room. It was a stress-relieving new pastime of hers. When she was done, she raised a white knit sweater. Beside her, Nejire said, "Whoa! If I didn't see you knit it, I'd think it was store-bought." Hado joyfully nodded in response to Rei's question, "Is it really that good? It fit a 6-year-old. Too bad I don't have any children who can fit in it." Midnight suggested, "Save it for the grandkids." The ladies and the bird all breathed in expectantly as the door suddenly opened. Nezu was on Aizawa's shoulder when he entered first, but Izuku was not present. Closing his black eyes and dropping his head, the dog-bear-cat-mouse thing said solemnly, "Ladies and gentlemen." They all had the worst suspicions. Till Nezu's head jerked upward, flashing a grin of ecstasy. "Please join me in welcoming the newest member of the UA student body." Izuku appeared with a slight smile on his face and his hands in his pockets. All of them clapped and cheered. Hawks and Nagant tousled his hair, Mount Lady patted his shoulder. Nejire and Rei embraced his sides, and Mirko slugged him. Being the focal point of all this good vibes, Izuku smiled. It's among the largest they've ever seen him produce. They threw the boy a celebratory party at Midnight's request. Music, drinks, and snacks. Even if it was a little thing, Izuku felt content with the people surrounding him. Izuku and Nejire had school in the morning, and Rei had a curfew at the hospital, so it couldn't go on for very long. However, Izuku was not only welcomed but also the focus of attention for the first time in a long time at a party. Oh, I almost forgot, Nezu murmured, approaching Izuku and extending a little, rectangular, red gadget in his paw. The master key to your inhibitor gauntlets. You can adjust how much of your they seal or remove the limiters entirely. Izuku's eyes became wide with shock. The principal and he were the center of attention. Principal, are you sure about this? You know what I can do. Nezu continued to smile despite his knowing nod. Yes, and you will still have to wear them during your gym and heroics classes. We trust you to be responsible with your power, just like the rest of our students. Izuku's stony heart began to soften. All he noticed when he glanced around him were supportive faces. They had faith in him. Reaching for the key to his whole strength, the youngster swallowed. Well, if you're all sure. Nezu and the others exuded confidence and support without displaying any signs of doubt. I won't make you regret this. Thank you, for everything. Izuku took off his gray jacket and rolled up his white shirt sleeves to show off his gauntlets. He placed the small red key into the bottom port of each gauntlet. Both of them collapsed to the floor. At last, Izuku's chains were removed. He grasped his pallid forearms and absorbed it for a minute. According to Najire, how do you feel? Izuku's arms blazed with emerald flames. He grinned and expelled them as quickly. He replied to Najire, better than ever. That evening with his father's portrait facing him and a smile on his face, Izuku lay between the covers in bed. Dad, can you believe it? I'm heading to the UA. Izuku's smile vanished as he said, the quirkless disappointment, making it into the best hero school in Japan. Katsuki and Izumi most likely also got in. I can't guarantee that I'll be able to gather my thoughts. What they done to me is known to you. VVVV. It's time for Izuku and Najire's evening conversations. Najire. ETTTTTT is what you made, Izuku. I'm still shocked, yes. Najire. I'm not, to get here, you had to endure hell. I may now formally refer to you as my junior. Izuku sneered, but he kept a tiny smile on his face. Izuku. That makes me wonder how you were able to attend my celebration. Did your classmates not want to know where you were? Najire. Prior to my final year at UA, I claimed to be going to spend the night with my folks. Although I never utilized it, Midnight supported me by granting me permission to exit the school grounds. Izuku. Cunning. Najire. Don't worry, tomorrow is your first day of school. Are you thrilled? Yes, I am. Despite your superior cooking skills, you still have to make friends, meet the professors, even though you already know many of them, and eat cafeteria cuisine. It will be fantastic. Izuku. You see, I didn't remember to tell you, tomorrow, I will not be attending school. Najire. Najire. What the death? Najire. What are you saying about skipping school? If you're just going to skip, what was the purpose of all this? Are you ill or something? Did you inadvertently consume alcohol? Izuku. No, you see, Nezu, Aizawa, and I spoke after my exam. According to Aizawa, my class will take a quirk assessment test prior to moving into the dorms in place of orientation. I don't need to show up until classes begin the next day because he has already witnessed my degree of restraint and knows that I'm actually much stronger at my best. Najire. Oh no, I was hoping to introduce you to my friends and have lunch with you. While your students are taking their tests, you're only going to relocate your belongings to your new room. Izuku. No, I will be observing them from a distance. Even though they are unaware of my presence, Aizawa and I are evaluating their abilities and personalities. Najire. Sounds good. Fortunately, I want to see what the freshmen can accomplish. You'll introduce yourself once they're finished, right? Izuku. One additional item. Aizawa has witnessed my abilities with my gauntlets, but he hasn't witnessed my capabilities without them. I'll get a private test after my classmates are finished. In order to prevent them from being disheartened, we both know that I will be at the top of the class, but they won't know by how much. In other places, Nezu was reviewing the approved UA list. Hopefuls. Ashido, Jiro, Asui, Uraraka, Hagakure, Kirishima, and Yaoyorozu. Izuku continued down the list, saying, Izuku will be delighted to see these faces again. Yagi and Bakugo. Well, who knows how they'll react to it. He found a name that made him smile. Todoroki Shoto. Since he and Izuku are both the sons of Mrs. Todoroki, they are practically brothers, therefore I'm confident they will get along. I feel optimistic about this year. Namori entered Nezu's office after he heard a knock on the door. The Chimera said, Midnight, what can I do for you? Can I see Izuku's test results? I asked Aizawa, but he said he didn't see them either. Nezu remarked, probably because he asked not to, as he dug into one of his drawers and took out the test results for Izuku. Here you are. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Midnight took the paper and studied it. The woman turned into a statue as her gaze froze at the top. Sir. This is a recommendation exam. Izuku was supposed to take the standardized test, she yelled. I gave Aizawa both papers, and gave Izuku the choice which one he would like. Midnight was hit by something. Izuku was given 2 hours to finish the test. 3 hours were required for the recommending pupils. She said tremblingly, Sir. How long did this take him? Nezu exclaimed joyfully, 1 hour and 50 minutes. Midnight's eyes protruded from her head. His touchdown was the last nail in the coffin. 100%, impressive. No, he's quite a quick learner, a prodigy even. He even outclassed Yaoyorozu. Don't tell her this, but she's no longer the top scorer in this test. Midnight was motionless, her face displaying amazement. And that's why Aizawa didn't want to look. It seems that they are afraid of Izuku for reasons other than just his might.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, bye bye.